People who have legally injured/killed someone in self-defense. What is your story? I've posted this as a comment on another Ask Reddit before, so copy/paste. My 18 years old brother and his, then, 18 years old wife lived next door to a family with a teenage son. She started an affair with that 17 years old son. One day, the son barged into my brother's place and started attacking him. My brother was packing and moving because he was leaving for the army. He had pulled down a metal pole in a closet to make room for boxes. My brother grabbed that pole and used it to fight off the teen. The kid ran out bleeding. My brother called my dad. We lived a few blocks down the street, and my dad jumped into action. He grabbed one of his hunting shotguns and some bird ammo. He ran out the door to the car screaming for us to call 911. My mom and I ran after him because we were clueless and wanted to see where he was headed. My mom was on the phone with the cop and they were dispatching the one cop that we had in our town. We start running down the road to my brother's place because we saw dad pull in. As we get near, we hear a gunshot and see my dad and brother taking cover behind the car doors they'd opened to climb in and leave. Another shot goes off and we can see it isn't my dad firing. The teen had run home next door and was bleeding and told his dad my brother was trying to kill him. His dad grabbed his handgun and saw my dad and brother leaving and started shooting. That's the gunfire mom and I heard. Dumbass kept running towards my dad's car. I saw my dad position his shotgun in the car window and fire one round. Then, he and my brother climbed in the car and started driving back at us/home. We all finally get together and dad says he shot the man in the stomach. Chaos breaks out on our street. Ambulance, cops, and people. They take the other dad away to the hospital and my dad into custody. Within hours, we find out that the man has died. The bird shot hit his liver and he bled out. My dad was charged with murder and we started receiving death threats in the cover of night. We are moved. We hid for days until my dad was bonded out. Ended up moving far away. Grand jury was convened and I had to testify to what I saw. After all the evidence and testimony were presented, my father wasn't charged because the grand jury decided it was self-defense. I now have contact with some friends from that town because of social media. We never talk about what happened or anything. Things carry on as normal. That day is forever burned into my memory. I've mentioned this before, so I'm going to combine a few posts on it in order to be a bit thorough. TLD, a meth head broke into my home with a bat, shot him 3 times, 1 miss. He died on the front lawn. It's hard because I don't have a vivid memory of every second. It's not like time slowed down, it was more rapid retroact. The adrenaline hits, and it gets patchy. It's more a series of pictures than a flowing memory for me. Loud crash and splintered wood sound. Get my gun. Check the hallway door frame is smashed. Hear intruder in room. Only way in or out is to hallway. I'm now covering. I was the only one home. Stay quiet, wait for intruder. See intruder come into hallway, shoot twice. Intruder still standing, but clearly staggered. Fire 3rd shot and 4th shot. Intruder staggers out doorway, collapse in yard. Call the police. Police arrive and take me in for questioning after surveying scene and roping it off. Intruder is dead from 3 GSWs. One of my shots missed. Do I feel bad about it? Yes and no. I feel bad that he put me in that situation. I feel bad that his life events lead him to use meth and lead him to believe attacking someone's home was a good idea. I do not feel bad about shooting him. He broke into my home. I wasn't about to ask him politely what he was there for and if he would mind waiting 20+ minutes for the police to arrive. Nor do I feel bad about killing him. If you ever draw your gun, you need to be committed to ending the threat. You cannot shoot for the knee. This isn't Hollywood. You shoot center mass, and that's where a lot of vital organs are. What would I have done differently? The main thing I would do differently is I didn't clear my house afterward. I was a bit in shock that I had just shot someone, and I waited in my one room where the intruder had been, since it only has one approach, pulled back the curtains, and waited for the just didn't occur to me. What were the police like? I mainly dealt with an investigator. He talked with me for about 20 minutes, not about the events, just about shit in general, who I was, what I did for work, what I like to do in my free time, He was just trying to calm me down. He eventually got around to discussing what happened, told me that he had a sure idea of what happened, but had to follow protocol, so he told me I had a choice. I could voluntarily get in the back of his car, go down to the station with him, and voluntarily submit to questioning. Or it could not be voluntary. I called my lawyer. He met me at the PD. I was questioned about the events, answered them, and was told I was free to go. They were filing no charges against me as they were satisfied that I had acted within my rights. How has it changed me psychologically? It really hasn't for the most part. Every now and then I'll think about it and be a little stunned. I killed another person. It's not a feeling that ever truly goes away. And I don't think it's ever something I'll fully get used to, but it is something I have fully accepted and do not feel guilty over. It's just kind of something that's always going to be there. Why did you have to shoot him? Why couldn't you just run away and turn my back on an attacker whom I don't know is armed or not, or how fast he is? Smart. Call the police. See their response time of 20+ minutes. I tell you what, let's play hide and seek. If I find you, I start beating on you with a baseball bat. Want to bet you can hide well enough for 20+ minutes? Give him what he wants. I don't know what he wants. And I'm not about to ask him to sit down 40 and discuss. Compliance does not guarantee safety. It just puts you 100% at their mercy. This hits too close to home. My brother's wife shot and killed him, supposedly in self-defense. They were avid goon owners, very right-wing, religious people. They had been married 20 years. There had never been an allegation of abuse, never a call to the police, zero evidence that they were not the perfect couple. She was initially charged with murder, but the charges were eventually dropped as the prosecutor got spooked by stories from other jurisdictions of women getting away with claiming self-defense, and I suppose he didn't want the loss on his record. What really hurts is that my sister-in-law never had to get on the stand or defend herself or tell her story in public other than to hire an expensive attorney who intimidated the DA. The icing on the cake is that she collected all of my brother's life insurance and was able to have him cremated all while she was in jail. It was 12 years ago, and to this day I have no idea where his ashes are. That sucks because he was a veteran who wanted to be buried at Arlington. Edit. Thanks to all the kind commenters, and for the suggestions about getting a headstone in Arlington, or another national cemetery. I just wanted to let you know that I have contacted the US Navy, and am now in the process of requesting Mike's DD-214. Apparently it takes up to 90 days to process my request, but that's the first step in the process. I can't believe that no one in my family ever thought of doing this before. Thank you all. Growing up biracial in rural Louisiana, I had to deal with my share of racism from both prominent groups. After I started getting college programs looking at me for athletics, a lot of the establishment in that shithole started getting jealous, trying to derail me getting out of their point. After Rivals magazine put me in the top 100 recruits in the country, the focus became almost fanatical. I couldn't go anywhere without people wanting to give me things, advice, wanting me to buy them stuff. When I made it pro, I had someone who was claiming to be my dad's cousin brokering deals with people to get sheet in my name. During my senior year playoffs, I suffered a career-ending knee injury where my patella was torn and dropped down my leg during a dirty hit. Well, the promise of a college/pro career disappeared overnight, and I lost my love for the game afterwards. I realized then that these schools didn't give a shit about me and only wanted me for my body instead of my mind. I joined the army, not because they gave a shit about me. I joined because I wanted to challenge myself and get an education which the army provided. When it was announced at HS graduation, people booed at me, said I turned my back on the community, and that I owed people who stuck their neck out for me. I went all white, became an Uncle Tom, etc. The black community called my mother a white bitch etc. At one of the HS graduation parties, dad's cousin got all pissed off and just berated me over and over again about it. I finally had enough and told him to back off in my colorful language. He slapped me and the fight was on, and after I floored his ass with a suplex, he pulled a knife on me and cut my right arm pretty deep. The sight of blood, the Uncle Toms, all of that made me lose it, and I tackled him and took a rock and smashed the left side of his face in. He didn't die, but he never walked again. Police were called. I was arrested and charged with attempted manslaughter. The only thing that saved me was my recruiter. My dad, former military, contacted him and told him what happened. Recruiter bailed me out and somehow charges were dropped. It's not on my record, and no mention of it ever occurred at MEP/basic/8. I stayed with the holdovers for 3 months, until my basic started. I'll never forget going through MEPs that fast, and was on a plane to Benin that same day. I never saw my recruiter again, and to this day, I would shake his hand and tell him he saved my life. Edit. So many replies, overwhelming positive. Some negative and all from Europeans or white liberals. That isn't a shock. Just FYI, my oldest sister had it harder than I did. My sister had the dedication and the athletics. I just gave 60-70% effort and coasted on my genes. My mother had a friend who had an abusive husband. One day she showed up at our home, disheveled, distressed, red marks on her face and arms, crying about her husband going crazy. My mom of course is sympathetic, but 1, it's the middle of the day, and 2, she's alone with me and my younger brother and she doesn't want the drama. She tells her friend she'll call the police and asks over and over again, is he going to come here? Because I can't have that. My dad, who old sent that asshole to the moon, bang, zoom, at a moment's notice, was at work. Mom's friend assured her that he isn't, because he doesn't know where she is, and says not to call police because, as it went/still goes, that will make it worse. Sure as she'd not. 10 minutes later there is an insane pounding on the front door and yelling, hubby's come to collect the missus and he doesn't care that he's making a scene. Mom tells me to take my brother and lock ourselves in her bedroom, but the bedroom is right by the front door and there is a window, so I can hear everything, and I get full view of what happens next. After more screaming between hubby and wife, and my mom, he throws his shoulder into the door. My mom has decided she's had it. Right before he goes to shoulder the door again, it flies open, and out comes my mother, swinging a baseball bat as hard as she can. She got few hits to the asshole's arms and one to his back, which sent him tumbling off the porch and into the grass. All the while she's cursing and threatening him, swinging the bat in the air like a lunatic. Think Shelley Duvall in The Shining, but with 1000% more profanity and a more controlled aim. My mother is 4 feet 10. If she weighed 100 pounds at the time, she weighed a lot. I doubt she did any real damage, but the shock of it made him scramble to his feet and haul us down the block. He did not come back, thankfully. But of course, as things went, and as they still go, mom's friend went back to the asshole after a short cooling off period. Thankfully she was able to finally get away, and the asshole is rarely mentioned now, but the story does come up occasionally when my mom and her friends have too many Bloody Marys over brunch. It seriously is one of my mom's proudest moments, haha. This happened a few years back, after I moved to a new city in the US, Illinois, and is a city that has a bad reputation for having some rough parts. I'll let you guess which one. I went out with some friends in what is typically a safe portion of the town, and we were out drinking at a local bar. When we were leaving the bar, a less than upstanding individual approached us and demanded phones and wallets while brandishing a rather small flip blade. This person was obviously not from this neighborhood and had traveled up there with the clear intention of working over some 20-somethings for easy cash. Naturally there's 3 of us, intoxicated and hopped up on 24-year-old hormones and other assorted fun things. So my one friend pulls the old "fuck you racial slur, you ain't getting shit" and takes a swing at the would-be mugger. Well, he misses, and the guy takes a swipe at him with the knife and cuts his arm pretty good. The second friend pulls out his phone and starts dialing 911 while screaming hysterically. Not his proudest moment, and the man turns to me with the knife. What did I do? Naturally the first thing that came to mind, I kicked him square in the nuts. This sent him down to 1 knee, as any well-placed drunken kick to the old chest of jewels would do, and the first friend at this point had recovered enough to land a good right hook across the guy's jaw. Him and I then proceeded to punch and kick the ever-loving snot out of this guy. Probably only a half dozen good shots, if we are being honest, until he managed to push us off of him and stagger out into the street, where a police cruiser just happened to be in the area and responding to the friend's 911 call. We messed the guy up pretty good, but as he had a knife and other patrons in the bar, had witnessed what happened. The police were not too terribly upset with the bloody mess of mugger on their hands at our doing. Point looking back, it's kind of lame, and not as cool as other people's experiences, but hey, it felt good to beat the piss out of some asshole who decided we would be good targets. I was working as a bouncer at a gay bar downtown. Had this drunk skip out on his tab at another bar and they called our bar to warn us. Sure enough, he was sitting in one of our booths, just kind of. Existing point manager that night tells me to haul his ass out because he's not welcome. So I do. He then stands outside the door I'm working, just non-stop yelling next to me, constantly poking at me and insulting me and kicking my ankles. Dumb childish shit. Point at one point he grabbed the cord for my earpiece by my collar and snapped it. So he got a solid boot to the balls and dropped to his knee for a minute or two, then went back to being a complete and utter do like he had been. Point I'm very patient. He was annoying, but I have a little brother and lots of younger cousins, so he was no worse than what I had growing up. This lasted a good half hour or so before, out of nowhere, while I'm checking IDs, I feel hands around my throat and they start to squeeze. Point didn't even think, just spun around, swung at face height, popping him solidly in the mouth, and grabbed him by the hair and bounced his face off the brick wall next to me. 4 or 5 guys who were watching the whole thing grabbed him, and he's just standing there still throwing insults at all of us in a complete drunken state, blood running from his face, and like a gift from above a police cruiser does a roll by, and I flagged him down real fast. Point cop gets out, asks what's going on. I give him a quick rundown. He asks what happened to the guy's face. I told him I punched him and bounced him off the wall after he grabbed my throat. Cop cuffs and stuffs him, and I never saw him darkening our doorway again. Point I'd like to think he sobered up in the drunk tank and reassessed his life, but he probably just went to be obnoxious at a bar without a doorman. Not self-defense, but I was working in landscaping a few years ago, putting some steel edging around giant flower beds. All was normal until my coworker, who I won't name, looked up and yelled "Hey!" very loudly out of nowhere. I thought it was just a joke or something at first, but raised my head to see a black dude going for a circular saw on my flatbed trailer. It was a $2,500 piece of equipment, so naturally I got up and ran after the guy with my freshly sharpened spade shovel with my heavyset coworker close behind. Relatively well, as soon as I got in range I threw my shovel as hard as I could, like a throwing axe, with 2 hands over my head while running at full speed with a sudden stop. So you can imagine the amount force behind it as it glided through the air. It hit him directly in the back of the head with the sound of metal hitting cement, except it was his skull. He dropped to the ground instantly. I thought I had just knocked him out, so we called the police and they arrived shortly after. After about 10 minutes and an ambulance showing up, they informed me that he wasn't knocked out. He was dead. I was transported to jail and spent 12 days there before seeing a judge and being released. I don't remember much of what happened legality wise because I was so concerned about going to prison or something, but I do know my coworkers came and gave their stories, and that if the guy's family wanted to bring up a civil case then I would be forced to testify and whatnot. That never happened. My boss told me that he was a wanted man and all this crap, but I'm pretty sure he was just trying to put my mind at bay. Point TLDR, dude tried to steal stuff. I threw a shovel at him and killed him, and it was expunged from my record. In high school, 2 1-8 thugs tried robbing me in the locker room after gym. I had to poop beforehand, so I was the last one in the locker room. One of them tried to grab me, and I instinctively swung and completely shattered his jaw. He was bleeding everywhere, and the other guy was kind of stunned, so I sprinted out and found the teacher. I told him what happened, and he went in to check on the other kid. They tried telling the resource officer that I had randomly assaulted the kid for no reason. I told him the truth. Both kids had a super extensive history of being pieces of shit, and I had never been in trouble at school. My word vs theirs, and they took mine. Kid went to the hospital and had to have some kind of surgery. I saw both of them in passing up until graduation, but nothing else ever happened or came of it. Last I saw on Facebook, they tried to rob a house together. One kid was shot and killed by the homeowner. The other is doing a shit ton of time in prison because he fled, but had left his cell phone in the dead friend's car they took there and had parked in front of the house they were robbing. Of course on his phone was all sorts of incriminating evidence. I don't really get it. I didn't grow up in a rough town or a town that had a lot of crime/violence. But I can't speak on others' lives/situation. They could have had some inner demons that they never found help for, if they even looked. Or they could just been two idiots who watched Boys in the Hood too many times. Back in the early 90s there were a lot of break-ins in my neighborhood in the suburbs of Dallas, so I decided to buy a gun. I'm a single dad, wife passed away when my kids were young, and I wasn't home a lot, so they were mostly just them, and a babysitter at the house, when I was working late most of the time, which made me nervous. I'm pretty anti-gun and still am to this day. Which I know isn't exactly a popular opinion to have in my area, but I can't dispute the fact that decision saved my life and the lives of my children. A guy broke into our home in the early afternoon one weekday while I was home early with my kids. He came in the patio back door, which was unlocked, with a large hunting knife, a backpack, and rope. I was upstairs in my home office doing work when I heard my daughter in the living room screaming, "Daddy, there's a man in the house." I heard him yelling at her and made out him yelling, "Shut up." I grabbed my gun out of the safe, ran downstairs, and found a man dressed in black holding a knife, standing in my living room yelling at my kids to get down on the floor. I put 4 in his torso and another 2 when he was down on the ground to make sure he was dead. I told me kids to go to the bathroom and lock the door, called the police, and they were at my house in less than 5 minutes. Turns out the DNA test on the body connected him to a string of other robberies and some unsolved B&E raps over the past few years in the area. We moved out of that house a few years later and relocated to Houston for my job, where I work as a geologist for an oil and gas company, which was for the best, because after that my kids were traumatized of sleeping in that house. They stayed at my sister's place for about a month after the incident, until they were ready to come back home and were happy to move to a new town, even though they still miss their old friends back home. My ex-boyfriend killed someone in self-defense. We had dated when we were 15 briefly. At the time of this event, we were 18 and both dating new people, and I was currently in university, away from home, and he was doing an extra year of high school. I got a phone call from my mom one day, and she told me a stabbing had happened at my old high school. She said the boy who did it was in my grade. When she told me his name and asked if I knew him, my jaw just about hit the floor. I didn't tell her we dated, since I didn't know the story yet, and just said we had some classes together. We hadn't been in contact since I had left for university. The original story I heard was that he stabbed a 19-year-old black man outside our high school after school hours. He was white, and although he had made racist jokes in the past, there was no malice behind it, and he was a very sweet kid. A few days later, he was released from police custody, and there was an outdoor from the local black community about how he was getting away with murder. People protested when he was released. The press was involved. Articles written with statements from the victim's family about how great their son was and what a terrible racist my ex was. It didn't help that he dressed in all black and listened to rock and metal music. All the details came out shortly thereafter. He was with his new girlfriend, sitting near the football field, when they were approached by a man with a gun. He was 6 feet 4 inches, 220 pounds of muscle, and my ex is 5 feet 11, 170 pounds, so a fair bit smaller. Anyway, he points the gun at them and demands all their money. They gave him all the cash they had and some other things, but it wasn't enough, and he became angry. He stuck the gun in the girl's mouth and threatened to blow her brains out if he didn't get more from them. That's when my ex pulled out a switchblade, stabbed him once in the chest, and he and his girlfriend ran away. Once off school grounds, and with no sign of the man who tried to mug them, they called the cops immediately. The man died on the scene. The man had just gotten out of juvenile detention. I read that it wasn't even a real gun. The event has severely faked up my ex mentally. He was called a racist and a murderer, even though he was just trying to save his girlfriend. He's now taking all kinds of drugs, can't get a job, and last I heard, is homeless. It's all very sad. Edit. Doubter prompted me to look up the old articles. I misremembered a few things and have some to add. The man was drunk and high on marijuana, had spent the whole day drinking and smoking. The man had a fresh gang tattoo. My ex and the girl gave him $10 and an iPod. Man started counting down from 10, threatening to kill the girl if he didn't get more by the time he finished counting. At this point is when my ex went into his bag and took out the knife. My ex stabbed him in the ribs, which caused the man to back off, but he still had a gun pointed at them, so they ran. He collapsed shortly after and was found by someone walking. My ex and the girl he was with took a cab and fled to his house before calling the cops. It was all caught on camera, so authorities knew the whole story early on and said that my ex's actions were found to be proportionate to the perceived harm. I had the weights wrong. X was 5 feet 11 inches 140 lbs. The guy he stabbed was 6 feet 2 inches 170 pounds. Still muscular and much bigger. He was originally charged with manslaughter, but all charges were withdrawn. My granny did. The story I was told growing up was that a man came to fight my dad when he was a teen for sleeping with the man's then girlfriend. The man followed my dad home and tried to force his way into the home to get to my dad. My granny then allegedly shot the man point blank in the chest with a shotgun of some caliber using rock salt as ammunition. Clear cuts off defense. Man survived and left my dad alone ever since. The end. What I pieced together as I got older was a different story that no one will confirm or deny to me. Yes, the man followed my dad, and yes, he did try to get my dad to come out of the house. However, he never forced his way in. He was told to leave, and when he refused, my granny returned with a shotgun and shot him point blank in the chest with a scatter shot. Is that the right way to describe that? The one with all the tiny pellets and stuff. From the way my aunt spoke of it, the man died, and due to loosely written laws at that time in the South, it was considered self-defense since the man would not leave my granny's porch despite a verbal warning. I don't know which version of the story is true, but I do know my granny did shoot a man on her porch. She kept the newspaper clipping hung in a frame in her bedroom and would happily tell the story of how she saved her son's life. My dad also confirms that she did shoot a man in his defense. He never told me which ending was the real ending though. I was working crash in South Central LA in 1995 and was the first car at a shooting call. There was a TV repair van. People used to actually fix TVs back in the day, parked at the curb with the driver's side door open. There was an obviously dead male in the street, laying on his back, with a red bandana over his face and a bullet hole literally between his eyes. He had sawed-off shotgun on his stomach, pointed towards his feet. His finger was still on the trigger. It looked like he was standing facing the driver's side door, then fell straight back. A black man in his late 60s approached us with his hands up. Told us he shot the guy and put the gun in his apartment. So the old guy had just won the lottery. Not millions, but like 40,000. This was a pretty gang infested area, so the local gangsters heard this and decided to rob him. I guess they thought he was walking around with a big fat roll of cash. The old guy had come home from work and was standing on the street leaning in the driver's side of the car when the gangster stuck the shotgun in his back. The old guy had been getting his 2 inches .38 revolver out of the car when he felt the gun in his back. Now mind you, he had legally bought the gun back in the 70s. Loaded it, never cleaned it or fired it. It was legally owned, but CCWs really don't exist in LA, so it wasn't legal to drive around with points. So the old guy pivots, shoot from the hip, and puts a .38 soft lead ball ammo from the 70s right between the gangster's eyes. The shot was a miracle. The fact that the cylinder spun and the hammer went back was a miracle, and the fact that crusty deteriorating 20-year-old ammo went off when he hit the bang button was a miracle. I drove him to the station, coached him on self-defense. He was interviewed by our homicide detectives, and I drove him home about 5 hours later. No crime for the shooting. The gun possession was a misdemeanor and he wasn't charged with it in the interest of justice. I've seen a few self-defense shootings, but this one always stood out. I worked for a bar and I would usually go with the closing manager to the bank to drop off the money bag after closing. This usually happened around 4 to 5 am. At the time I owned a gun and wore it when we went to drop off the money. One night I follow her over to the bank and she gets out to go to the night drop box and a guy runs up on her. He has a big knife. I get out of my car and point my gun at him and tell him to go the fuck away. He starts running straight at me. Every bit of training I ever thought I had totally left me at that moment. I closed my eyes and pulled the trigger. He goes down howling in pain with a big hole in his thigh. The bar manager dials 911 and starts shouting into the phone. I run over and kick the knife away to where this guy can't reach it. It's just general mayhem for a couple of minutes. A police officer driving by sees me holding a gun on a guy that is laying on the ground, and he comes flying over the curb, lights and siren going full blast point between the two of us. We tell the officer what happened. He sees how full of adrenaline I am and gets the gun from me very calmly. An ambulance shows up and takes the robber away. I'm ready to get arrested, but I don't. They ask me to come answer some questions. So we go downtown and I sit and talk to two different guys and tell them the story. The manager sits and tells them the story, and then they give us both rides back to our cars. No charges were pressed on me. I testified against the guy I shot, and he went to prison. He had quite a history of doing bad things. His family filed civil lawsuits against both me and the bar I worked for. I got fired from my job, but the lawsuit against me got thrown out, as did the lawsuit against the bar. Back in the early 90s, when I was about 3 to 4 years old, a man broke into our house in the middle of the night. I had woken up because I thought it was morning already and that I was missing out when I heard movement downstairs. I walked into the kitchen to find a man I didn't know, all dressed in black, carrying what appeared to be a baseball bat. I looked up at him and he jumped when he saw me. Hello, he said. Hi. I replied, who are you, Uncle Billy? It's still very early. It's not time to get up yet. I think your mummy would want you to still be in bed. I looked at him for a second and decided if he was called uncle he was a friend. My parents used ask my sister and I to call their friends uncle and auntie as a mark of respect. I went back upstairs and fell back all asleep. The next morning I told my mum what I had seen and she laughed it off because I had trouble distinguishing my dreams from reality when I was that age. As I sat down to my usual Cocoa Pops, I watched her get a duster out to clean the back window by the door. The glass was missing. She looked around the kitchen and saw that her handbag was missing. The police were called, and after a few hours they returned Mum's handbag. They found it empty under a blackberry bush at the end of the road. Now 2 doors down there was a chap called Mr. Forrest. He was a martial arts teacher. He had mastered karate, aikido, judo and kickboxing. In short, he was not a man to be trifled with. He had been chatting to the neighbors and had come to realize that there seemed to be a pattern to the robberies. They were burglarizing one house, missing 2, and then a few nights later breaking into that house. So for the next few nights, he sat up in his house with the lights off, waiting. Eventually it paid off. The guy broke into his house in exactly the same way he did ours, climbed into Mr. Forrest's kitchen and walked into the living room. The guy started when he saw Mr. Forrest and took a swing at him. Within seconds he had been expertly taken down, knocked out and tied up. The next morning, I woke up and looked out of the front window to see a couple of police cars, and Mr. Forrest casually stood on his front lawn with his pot-bellied pig and 3 geese. He used to take them for walks down the road every morning and entertain the kids by leaping over cars and doing flips, telling them how he had woken up when he heard someone break in and had taken him down. Although he told us the truth a few years later, no one ever reported it. As far as we were all concerned, he did a good job. The criminal did try and take Mr. Forrest to court for injuring him. I think he smacked his face on the coffee table as he went down and took out some of his front teeth. But nothing ever really happened. TLDR, guy kept breaking into neighbors' houses. Martial arts specialist neighbor took the guy out. In 2013, I was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. One night me and some of my friends went into the neighboring town of Fayetteville to hit the bars along a notoriously sketchy stretch of road called Bragg Boulevard. The night went fine, and everyone was enjoying themselves, but I had decided to call it an early night and leave the bar around 12:30ish. I left the bar in hopes of grabbing a cab back to the house I was renting, but none were in sight. I decided to walk a little further down, figuring I would probably see one sooner or later. Now I should probably inform you guys that my installation had a lengthy policy about off-limit areas. Any 80-second guys can attest that a lot of them were on Bragg Boulevard. Specifically, and you could actually face disciplinary action if you got caught there. Not to mention the town of Fayetteville, as with most military towns, are famous for attracting scummy shady people. As I was getting close to one of the town's famous strip clubs, I found myself passing through a parking lot for some of the businesses nearby. As I'm cutting through the lot, this homeless looking guy comes out of the shadows, pretty much caught me by surprise. Bums being quite common in that part of town, I thought nothing of it and continued on my way. As I was passing him by, I caught a better look at the guy and the smell that accompanied him. Dude was the poster boy for meth addiction. I mean, the man would fit right in as an extra on The Walking Dead. Guy was pale, thin, and his face looked like he exfoliated with a cheese grater. He also stank of week old piss. Homeless dude proceeded to call out to me and ask me if I had any spare change. I told him I didn't and kept walking. He immediately put a hand on my shoulder and pulled me back. At this point, my instincts were telling me to get away from him. I told him that I didn't have any money to give him and I didn't want any trouble. Dude pulls out a knife and demands my wallet and my phone. I tell him again I don't want any trouble and that I'm just trying to get home for the night. Now, keep in mind, I'm 23 years old at this point. In my life, good shape from being in the military, I could probably take this guy out, but everything I was ever taught tells me to just get away. Also, being a medic, I had the good sense to know he was probably high off something, or there was a chance he had needles or something that could get me faked. If he didn't stab me first, I try to break the distance, but he keeps getting closer and forces me toward the cars parked nearby. I tell him again to back off. He refuses. Little does this fact know, I'm a native Southside Chicagoan and got my Ford in 250 as soon as I legally could, and that I had my trusty Glock 17 in a IWB holster. I drew my weapon and told him one last time to back off, that I didn't want to hurt him and that we could both go home right now. Again, he comes at me with his sheety knife, so I shoot him in the lower abdomen. Dude falls to the ground, drops the knife and starts bleeding pretty bad. I tell him again to relax and I could call an ambulance and the police to help him. As soon as I said that, the guy lets out this shriek and tries to charge at me, definitely high on something, so I shot him twice more, hitting him in the chest. He didn't get up after that point, ended up calling the cops, told them what happened, and they sided with me pretty easily. Had to let my command team know what happened too. They were more concerned with why I was in that area at that time of night without a battle buddy and a plan instead of me almost being gutted. Received a negative counseling and had to write a 500-word essay on the importance of having a plan for weekend safety. TLDR, crazy meth guy tried to stab me to steal my stuff. Dies trying. Somehow has the last laugh through the Army's disciplinary policy. Not a death and arguable for self-defense. Definitely not a death. But when I was younger, 13 or 14, playing baseball, I had a massive collision at home plate. I was trying to score from third on a passed ball, errant throw down the line from the catcher, and I ended up burying the back of my helmet into the back of the skull of the pitcher. My helmet visor broke off and somewhat scalped the pitcher. After a ridiculous collision, my body ended up on top of home plate. I was incoherent at the time and remember a little about being helped back to the dugout. Anyway, the guy had to have over 50 stitches/staples. Apparently, he was some sort of prodigy pitcher and I faked up his future. For the next 3 years, my family and I were stalked at every game by multiple people. One person even came to our home. He was met with a gun, so he decided to leave. It even followed/transferred over to my high school career. I can go on, but it's not worth a time. Pre-edit, if that's a thing. There was absolutely no slide rule at this time. Regardless, the ball was thrown nearly 15 feet down the third baseline. A collision was inevitable. As a result of this bullshit, I was often using fake names and numbers in multiple tournaments. My parents now carried everywhere in our county and often carried outside of the county. It was as though I hurt baby Jesus in doubleheaders. I often had to switch jerseys and names to try to alleviate the bullshit, even if I had to pitch both games. No, there were no pitching rules at the time. I pitched 34 games in a row. Long story short, eat it John. You weren't that good. Does war count? In 2009 I was deployed to Afghanistan. I was a machine gunner in an infantry squad conducting foot patrols all over South Afghan. Point fighting and killing in war is confusing as shit. It is hard to know if and when you killed someone. Imagine if you and your 13 squad mates are banging around and 3 guys open up with axe at you. Point all 13 of return fire and 3 guys 200 meters away are dead. Who killed who? That's a simple one. Imagine the same with urban environments, 40mm grenades, and moving targets. Your squad can be responsible for lots of kills, but it's tough to say who did what. Point well, I do know I killed at least one person. We used to go into this village every day, and we knew we'd get into a fight. In this part of Afghan there is no real roads, and if you got into the sheet you were by yourself until a squad on foot could get to you. Point what about air? Well, this was early in Obama's first term and heavy machine guns and up required all sorts of sheet permission to use. Getting approved for RT and air wasn't going to happen. Point additionally we were neutered. My job calls for a medium machine gun, but there wasn't enough, so I was toting a light machine and M249 saw. We had 40mm grenades, but were not allowed to take hand grenades, so we approach this village and we have 200 yards of clear fields to get through. It's an area ripe for an ambush. They hit us like they always did, and we bounded by fire team forward. Point war is confusing as hell, so even when you think you know where the fire is coming from it can be confusing. Spider holes, windows and small alleys are home to hidden axes. We fought towards the town. My team hit the town first. As we approached we got lit up from everywhere. Complete chaos. We run towards the nearest compound to get cover. We are moving west and getting fired on from a valley to our northwest. First guy hits the wall and starts returning fire. Point I'm third in the squad team with the corpsman behind me and team leader ahead of me. Has loading a 40mm to deal with the alley as whole. When he gets fired one from the compound, Hez running towards. The fire is coming from an outbuildings with a small spider hole. He sprints past it and is now on the same plane as the shooter, so Hez safe. I'm at a dead sprint behind him when he screams at me and Doctor clear the building. Conventional wisdom says the open bolt machine gun shouldn't make entry, but conventional wisdom never met Murphy. Point these compounds are made of mud and the doors are a one-piece door and frame made from cheap metal. I slam into it with all 6 feet 4 and 220 pounds plus gun armor and ammo of me. Point the room is as big as a standard bathroom. Homie with the Kalash is firing from the hip through a hole about waist height. Point he turns to see me and pulls his barrel out of the hole. By this time I've pulled the trigger and hoped for the best. The M249 is a squirt gun, and at that range I didn't need to aim. I hit him over dozen times from his stomach to neck. Point people don't dance. When they hit by 1 milligrams they just kinda fall over. Doc made entry made 2 seconds behind me. He did a dead check and we moved on and kept fighting. Point did it change me? I don't know. How much introspection does a 19 years old at war have? I didn't get a lot of time to think about it because war goes on. Do I feel guilty now? Now we both woke up that morning and picked up guns instead of clothes, so we both made a choice. I just got a little luckier. Posted this before. Point most of this recollection is from the My Bodicam I watched once, then repressed it in my memory. Point armed guard, major metropolitan mall, violent area, gangs etc. Prior to the shooting, we had a shoplifter. He got arrested. He popped 4 felony warrants. Well, he was in a gang leader. In fact, Point his buddies wanted revenge. They did a drive-by. Point at 11 PM. They drive up in a black 4-door, windows rolled down. They open fire. Point I don't remember much, but metal bees flying past me. I remember unholstering and firing. I remember firing 3 to 4 round volleys, trying to reposition. I can't remember why, but I kept firing. It felt like it lasted forever. I wasn't thinking, I was just doing what my training told me to. Point after the dust settled, I ran to a 9-year-old girl who was struck above the collarbone. I see the mother screaming. I tried to give first aid. It was too late. Point I ended up firing 40 rounds. I don't remember it, but apparently they really wanted me dead. I remember seeing the aftermath. Glass was everywhere. I wasn't charged. I did strike the car about 12 times. Later that day, PD found the car with numerous amounts of blood. Unfortunately, the 9-year-old girl was killed. I couldn't save her. I really wish I would have died instead of her. I really shouldn't be alive. 2 out of 4 were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Murder 1, attempted murder, and weapon charges. Other 2 died at the hospital. After this, I took about 3 months leave of absence. I still haven't fully recovered 100%, but I'm doing a lot better. The next one was a guy high on PCP who charged me with glass in his hand. This one was months prior to the first. I upholstered, fired 4 rounds. He dropped as I could describe as a body going limp. It was painful. Apparent I struck him in the eye. He was dead. I wasn't charged. I got jumped for my phone once. I'm a 6 feet 3 inches 320 pound former defensive tackle who watches too much UFC. By all rights I should have gotten my ass kicked and lost my phone. So, I was walking home from a 7 to 11 at night. I know, stupid choice #1, and heard someone behind me, so I turned around and said, "Why are you following me?" He had been behind me for about 5 minutes. "Hey, do you know how to get to some apartment complex?" "I don't remember." "No." "Well, can you look it up? I'm supposed to meet someone, and I got lost. I tried to call them, but they aren't answering. So I took my phone out of my pocket to look up the directions. Stupid mistake #2. He lunges to try to grab my phone and misses. Now, I'm big and I'm strong, but I'm not fast, so running didn't occur to me. What did occur to me was to do one of those side leg kicks like the fighters do. So I kicked him in the side of the leg. Didn't work that well. There's probably some technique to that. It just pissed him off. He lunged again, and I got very lucky. I swung at him and caught him in the jaw. He went out like a light, and I heard something crack when he hit the ground. Don't know what, but it sounded like bone. I've heard that before many times playing football. I called 911 in case it was something serious. Cops and an ambulance got there like 5 minutes later, and I got put in handcuffs until they eyed the guy. He had priors for burglary and robbery, so my story checked out. I'm just glad he wasn't armed. Turns out he landed gator armed. Broke his wrist and a few fingers. This happened to my mom's cousin. In Mexican culture we call our parents' cousins uncle/aunt, so I'll be referring to him as my uncle. This has become the story to tell during family get-togethers. So my uncle was a big drunk and very stupid. So this happened in Mexico many few years ago, when you could get away with having guns. My uncle was a great big drunk, and a big dick, from what I hear. He liked to get drunk at the local bar, but instead of taking the muddy road home he would instead cross into his neighbor's property to get home quicker. His neighbor didn't like this, and kept demanding he not cross through his property. One Sunday evening my uncle, drunk and lazy, as some Mexicans can be, again decided to cut through his neighbor's ranch, and was stumbling home. The property owner came up in his truck, and told my uncle to turn back, and take the street home. My uncle, being stubborn and stupid, had a holstered pistol, like a cowboy, and decided to intimidate the neighbor. Unbeknownst to my uncle, the neighbor had a shotgun on his lap, and when he saw my uncle reaching for his pistol and pull out his shotgun and blasted him, shot dead. Since my uncle was trespassing, and they had laws similar to Texas, where you can shoot trespassers, it was considered legal self-defense and the neighbor didn't get in trouble. And worse, a few years later my uncle's wife, now a widow, was using a hoe to cut grass and accidentally fell on it. She laid there bleeding for days before she eventually died, and since her kids had moved out nobody could hear her cries for help. Maybe the neighbor heard, but he wasn't going to help. Moral of the story: take the long route back to your home after drinking, and avoid being shot by overprotective neighbors. My grandfather always has this amazing story about his father during WWII. We are Dutch, and during the occupation in the Netherlands, the town my grandfather and his parents lived in was occupied by German Wehrmacht. The barracks, or kaserne as we call it, Nazi headquarters, was around the corner from my granddad's dad. The war-matched guys were pretty much your run-of-the-mill soldiers, just kids being drafted into a war they don't want to fight. Point of course, there were also a couple of SS officers that came in every once in a while. One of them took a position there. During the occupation there was a lot of partying from the Germans, and one day something crazy happened. My grandfather's mother was just coming back from the market on her bike and suddenly the SS Oberfahrer, drunk of his tigs, hit my great grandmother with his fancy Mercedes, breaking her shoulder bone. Now my great grandfather was a beast, 2.10 meters, hands that could crush a soda can, and strong like a bear. Even though he was an insurance man at the time, most of his life he worked on knotwilgen, which are trees that can be delved for making baskets and stuff, which made his hands huge and strong. So, of course, my great grandfather went outside. My great grandmother was hit right outside the house, and just as he was tending to his wife, the drunk Oberfahrer got out of the car. My great grandfather didn't hesitate, and knocked him the fuck out. One punch, broke his nose, and he was on the ground. My GGF took my great grandmother inside to tend to her. Of course, the rest of the day, my GGF and great grandmother were terrified. He just beat the shit out of an SS Oberfahrer in the middle of occupation. FFW to the next day. An entire delegation of Nazi cars pulled up to the house. I'm talking 2 huge black Mercedes, a couple of cars with soldiers, and out stepped the Oberfahrer with a couple of generals in full attire. My girlfriend and great grandmother are shooting bricks at this point because they knew this was the end. My great grandmother is going against the wall. So they knock on the door. My great grandmother is crying. My great grandmother opens the door. Here stands an SS Oberfahrer in full attire with a broken nose and a black eye. Where is your wife, great grandmother? In the living room. SS. Good. The Oberfahrer turns around, snaps his fingers, and a couple of soldiers run to the car and return with a huge bouquet of flowers and 2 baskets filled with all sorts of food, wine, and port. He was there to apologize for his horrible behavior and made a couple of rookie soldiers help out my great grandmother with her yard work for a week. Because Nazis obviously like to dig holes. Always a story that I love hearing when I'm at my grandfather and grandmother. Pretty simple and not so sweet, but here goes. I was driving around with my now ex-girlfriend through the country, having just smoked some of that devil's lettuce about an hour earlier. We were having a wonderful time until I must ran over something quite sharp as it blew my driver's side tire. Luckily, we were right next to a long driveway onto someone's property. I pulled in and off to the side, probably a good 80 feet or so from the house. I turned my truck off and proceeded to put the spare tire on point. Before I could even get the ruined tire off, the guy who owned the place comes out and yells, "What the fuck are you doing on my property?" I calmly told him that I had a flat tire and was just changing it real quick so I could get back home. Since he was quite a distance away, I started to walk towards him slowly, so we both didn't have to yell, as he appeared to be in his late 60s. He then disappears in the doorway quickly and pulls out a shotgun that was, I think, next to the doorway. He points it at me and tells me I have 5 seconds to get off his property. I bolted back to my truck, but soon realized I wasn't going anywhere anytime soon, as I had to get the spare tire on. I tried to tell the guy that, and then he shoots in the air and proceeds to yell obscenities at me. At this point I'm absolutely terrified, telling my girlfriend to call the police as I pull my .40 S&W shield out of the glove box. I never aimed it at the guy and attempted to keep it hidden, but wanted it just in case he shot at us. Well, he did. We both got behind my truck and I fired a warning shot, afraid that I would have to actually shoot this man. At that point, he went back inside, and we waited for the police to arrive. I don't know if he got charged with anything, because once they arrived, and I explained my situation, I very quickly put on the spare tire, and got the fuck out of Dodge. I've told some viral people this story, but it still feels a bit unreal. I have always followed self-defense, but never put it into practice. One Christmas a few years back everyone gets pepper spray, except me cause I'm youngest. So I owned a small flip blade, lol. Anyway, fast forward a little bit under a year and I'm walking alone at 2 AM in St. Paul. Not my best moment, but I wanted some Doritos. Some guys are walking across from me and I see them start whispering and look at me. I always watch those self-defense videos where one of the steps is being aware point now. Usually you are probably aware too much and nothing happens. But regardless, I put my hand on my blade and flipped it open in pocket. Now one guy runs ahead and the other crosses towards me. Yay, okay. He starts asking about what time the bus comes, if I have coins, etc. Now his buddy must have been like, look out, so only this dude is here. He suddenly says, give me your phone. Now, he brandishes a little blade by his side point now. Since he doesn't know I'm holding one, I should have the jump, but he reacts in time to get a little swipe on my forearm. I have a scar there now. I, however, got a full-on stab in his chest. He runs off, and his buddy is heard running too from afar. I really didn't process what happened, so I just head into my dad's apartment. He asks me, what took you? No shit, I casually go, oh, some guys tried to rob me. He is obviously flustered, but he tells me to get in his car and we see the guy at the liquor store across from us trying to steal there now. Not the brightest, eh? My dad is obviously very angry and parks then yells, did you rob my son, nigga? He never said a slur in his life, so I knew he was angrier than ever, and I don't hold it against him. Guy runs away, and we call cops, answer questions, yada yada. Get a call 3 days later he was picked up a few cities over. Dunno about his bud. There was a report filed, but I'd honestly have no idea how to find it. Point as for the effects, it feels odd sometimes to think about, but I did what I felt I needed to. I'm happy knowing I didn't end up truly hurt. Point as for my forearm/scar, the cut was pretty small and shallow, so it wasn't noticeable combined with adrenaline. Point to see how small it really was. http://imga.com/ My brother and I were walking home late one night on a closed road and a crowd of people, probably 11 to 14 deep, separated us. It was obvious the person talking to me was their best fighter, because once I took him out, they all froze, and I trotted through them like a hot knife into butter. This guy starts talking to me, pretending to befriend me, asking what I'm up to, where I'm headed, and he reached for my cruiser board. I let it go. The next thing he does is sucker punch me w/a left hook. Point the last thing I saw was my brother about 10 feet away with his jaw dropped in AWH of the whole thing. Point he ran real quick, which is a given, because there were so many of them. There is no sense in both of us getting hurt. Point anyway, I keel over from the waist to stand at a 90° after getting hit. I'm taking kicks and punches to the face. He's having a go, one would say. With every bit of contact he's making, I'm actually gaining back consciousness. Still at a 90° point, I grabbed his collar and threw him into a gate, and the sound of him hitting the metal was sobering. Point I was in shock of the whole thing. He looked dead. It was a quick glance at him before I picked up my board that I gave to back quote dude that hit his head started to wake up. I don't know why I wasn't running, but my walk quickly turned into a run. When I hear him say he's over here, I run and hop onto my board as I see a runway to get away. The board I had easily topped 25 on flat, so in this situation I was pushing and pushing, and I make a turn running into this guy coming back from chasing my brother. Where ya going? Huh? Where ya going? He's talking and I'm pushing harder to take the flex in my board as an advantage, to project myself like a torpedo. Point we embrace each other, but not before I hear a crack from my head hitting his face. Point my hands were tangled in his hair and I scrambled to get them out, but as soon as I did, I ran toward the mob to get my cruiser, because it was priceless, a discontinued model and a gift. I outrun them, and my house was right next to this whole debacle, so I wasn't going straight home. When I do come home, I see my brother with a scratch on his neck and a tear in his shirt. He was so worried. I don't think his worry lasted that long, because I was completely fine. No bruising, broken bones. That pose threw a rock at me and it hit me square in the back of my head, but the adrenaline, it didn't hurt for long. A bump was felt, but whatever, the neighbors called the cops and they questioned my brother and I. In hindsight, the cops were probably thinking this guy hurt them and didn't get a scratch on him. Peas. I have no training or special skills. This was instinctive, fight or flight. I'm not special PPS. This confrontation was a pivotal moment of my life, and it is neither positive or negative, it's just an unfortunate fortune of fortunes. Not me, but my uncle. Also, mobile formatting. Sorry. An acquaintance of my uncle followed him home and kept harassing him. Apparently he thought my uncle slept with his wife. Anyway, one day my uncle gets in his car, about to drive to work, when he sees in his rearview mirror the guy slowly walking towards his car now. Back then, my uncle used to carry a gun, not in the US, by the way, and I guess he could tell something was off, because he had pulled it out and cocked it in advance. Granted, that's illegal, but who TF's gonna prove he did that? Anyway, as it turns out, my uncle was right, because as he got out of the car to talk to the guy, or rather scare him off with the gun, I guess, he slashed the side of my uncle's throat with a knife, only barely missing his artery. My uncle fell back, literally fell on his back, and shot the guy in the torso 3 times. He says he heard him mutter, in Hebrew, something along the lines of "You just shot me, you son of a bitch," before falling to the ground himself. My uncle, in his frenzy, then grabbed the nearest rock and bashed the guy's face in. Luckily for him, later it was determined he died even before the rock face bashing, because had that killed him, it wouldn't really be self-defense anymore. When the paramedics arrived, they took off the guy's jacket, which had gunpowder residue on it, which was crucial to prove in court that my uncle shot him from up close, in self-defense, and the suing attorney, I don't know the term, okay sorry, knew that. The jacket wasn't presented as evidence, but kept quiet about it, and so my uncle was about to be sent to jail for murder. My dad picked up on it though, and demanded that the jacket should be investigated by the coroner, or whatever. It was found to have gunpowder residue, hence proving the guy he shot was close enough for it to be self-defense. I told this elsewhere, so apologies if it's familiar. TLDR, young girl stabs big boy in face, gets off scot-free, except some PTSD. 2 years ago, when I was 18, I was at a warehouse party, not legal, minimal security, many underage drinkers / smokers, some gang affiliated stuff came up, and someone ended up pouring liquor all over my expensive DJ set and stole my phone. As I was walking out to my car, I was telling a security guy about what happened when said thief overheard me and started charging me. I'm a 5'5", 120-pound girl, and this man was maybe 6'5", 250 pounds, so I'm instantly petrified. I started running and clutched my keys, only to feel the thief grab my shoulder and spin me around. He was winding up to swing on me when I spastically stabbed him in the cheek with my keys. We were both stunned for a moment, that being my first physical altercation ever, and him probably being the first physical altercation with a small girl. I started to run when one of his friends who had seen came and tackled me and curb stomped me, breaking 3 ribs in the process. In the meantime, someone had called the police, so they pulled in right when I was writhing in pain, and everyone else ran off. I was suddenly there alone, except for 3 other friends who had gotten jumped, with someone else's blood on my hands and cops coming over to question me. I was stunned, but told them what my experience was, what was stolen and lost, and they told me to go home and clean myself up. No more statement taken on their end. In hindsight, I shouldn't have been there in the first place. It wasn't the best part of town, and I had no contract / insurance on my gear. It really faked me up mentally and gave me bad social anxiety and general PTSD. I've been in therapy for it since and have started taking self-defense classes as well. I do not feel bad whatsoever, as a stabbed cheek is more affordable than my medical bills, new laptop, new phone, and new DJ controller. There were maybe 6 said gang members, and they did much worse damage to my friends. This story I have to tell this way because of how it came to be. So I was 21, and this first incident involved a guy, 30s, that for some reason wanted to show this other dude and his friend, 20 to 25, his missing finger, and he was getting offended because the 20-somethings didn't want to see and told him to back off. Meanwhile, I'm on the 5th floor about a football field away when I get this call. So when I finally make it there, the dude was being escorted out by some other guys and told to chill for a minute. Okay, that's resolved. I went to the staff and started asking my investigation questions. Then the waitress said, "Well, it's not over." Turned around and this tall skinny dude is all up in this shorter guy's face. Story came out that shorty was showing tall dude's wife how to play pool in a rather interesting way. Well, tall skinny as me yells at the guy to back off. Mistake 1. He turns and now has in my face. Alright, so with some smooth talking and allowing him to make an ass out of himself to his wife and bar, we start walking out. He calls her a really bad name and she goes back in. Heads outside, turns, and I'm there snot. I tell him to have a smoke and I'll go get her and be right back. I turn around and start to go get his wife. Mind you, I'm 6 feet 2, 155 lbs. This dude easily has 100 pounds on me, stands and easy 4 inches above me and is plastered. I hear this loud as crash, turn around, and this dude is coming at me full bore, cigarette in hand and black eyes, straight at me. Reflexes tell me going toe to toe with this guy is a bad idea. Without flinching, I grabbed my MK40 Mason spray point attempt 1. Well, I stunned him and he stopped moving and his glasses took the brunt of the spray point. He comes to and is madder than a mama bear being blocked from her cub. Attempt 2 went for his forehead clean and clear shot. Finally got him to stop altogether. Got his wrist yelling commands to put his hands on the wall. He pulls me towards the wall and with cigarette in the other hand, closed fist coming at my face, I duck, grab his wasted and with his momentum take him to the ground, yelling at him not to move. Cuffed him up. Called my supervisor a 911 for the mace spray point. He sued my security company and hotel for hospital bills. Turns out this exact guy was arrested by me 2 years prior for breaking and entering the then Rose Garden. So he has a rap sheet. Found out he had a pacemaker and it was working overtime between when I took him down. He passed out and the ambulance brought him back. Back in my country, Colombia, my grandpa had problems with the law, but I was so young they never explained to me what happened. One day after he had gone through extensive cancer treatment, I was already a teenager. We had a sort of bonding moment where he told me the story. He would always go to work very early, 5-6 am, and get out very late, 9 to 11 pm, but he has always gone to work in his bicycle, which is a really good racing bicycle that he has had for over 50 years. One night after he was out of work, he stumbled upon a guy who approached him at a lonely intersection as my grandpa was waiting to cross. The guy then proceeded to take out a knife and try to rob him. My grandpa, who was a bodybuilder slash soccer player slash cyclist in his former days, took out the knife he always carried in this belt and fought the guy to the point of stabbing him badly. My grandpa then took advantage of the situation and took off the place. The next day, when he was going to make the police report, as he was doing it, the officer who was taking the information told him that a guy had already made a police report of this incident and that in the police report he said my grandpa was trying to rob him and stabbed him after doing so. The officer then asked him to wait while he got his superior, but my grandpa took off the station. About 10 years later he still had the unfairly charged assault and robbery made by the thief who tried to rob him. PD. We discovered about 2 years ago that the case had been closed and the charge was not on the system anymore, so like nothing happened, lol. I didn't kill them, just saying. But where I live there are zero lights or lighting systems at the river, so when I take my dog out I always have a bag. In this bag, some cigarettes, a lighter, dog treats, poop bags, a Swiss Army knife, just in case there was a rope on a tree, an abandoned net or anything that could get tangled around my doggo, and my heavy duty flashlight. I was walking to doggo, and well it had dark, so out comes the flashlight. I swoosh it around a bit, checking my surroundings for squirrels, birds or a downed bat, but instead I see an old guy in the wooded area of the river. A conversation occurs. Me, hello. Sir, are you okay? Man, no response. Me, do you need me to call someone? I was raised to always be suspicious of others, so don't hold that against me. He walks out the trees and towards me, so I get into a fight or flight stance and tell him to keep his distance. He doesn't and keeps walking towards me until he's within arm's length. I noticed he's shorter than me. I'm about 5'8", and start weighing out my options until he reaches for my bag and pulls a hand out his pocket. It's not a knife, but it's one of those pound shop hammers you can get So my fight reflex kicks in. I hit him over the head with the flashlight and down he goes, rolling about until he rolls over the bank of the river. I tie Tyson to a tree, set the flashlight to an SOS signal, and call the emergency services. They arrive, get the guy out of the river, check his head wound, and take him to the hospital. Turns out he recently got stitches in his head due to a prior injury. I think it was a car crash, and I had reopened the wound, which had me panicking. Meanwhile Ty was getting so much damn attention. I heard yelling outside my house one night. I don't live in the best of areas, but there's a tattoo shop and a smoke shop right next to my house. Sometimes they are open late, and they smoke outside, right next to my front window, and I typically don't mind hearing them from time to time. This was really loud though, and I was worried they might wake my son, so I decided to go out and ask them to quiet down. And on the way out I saw a small knife I usually use when I'm camping, and for some reason was compelled to grab it. So when I get on my front porch, I realize there's a couple arguing in my driveway. A man standing, and a woman in a van with the door half open, screaming about medication for someone else. Great. So I yell and ask them to please leave, and they ignore me. So I, like a dumbass, decided to brandish my weapon and go closer, letting them know I had the knife and they needed to go now. The guy started walking towards me, saying thank you, thank you, thank you. And I was like, for what? Leave. And so he walked 5 feet away, and she drove up to him again, and the argument continued. I keep asking them to leave, should have just called the cops, but no. Homeboy walks back to me, and the lady is pissed, so she turns the van around and is now screaming at me. She gets out to confront me and slams a can-to-go water bottle over my head. It shatters and soaks me, lol. And while I'm stunned she tried to clobber me, and she almost did, as she was twice my size, but I got my arm free and stabbed at her, hitting her a couple times and also hitting the van. She got my arm again, so I threw the knife. At this point I saw a phone and thought it was mine, so I grabbed it, but it was hers. She said something about me faking with her sheet, so I checked it, and she took off after it. I found my phone, took a pic of her license plate as she was telling me she was going to go get her gun cause I stabbed her, and she shows where I live, etc. I called the cops and they showed up, found her around the corner where she lived in a shitty motel, and arrested her for not only assaulting me, but for driving drunk. The cops took my knife as evidence, and that's the last I heard of it. This happened maybe a year ago. I know I was stupid for putting myself in that situation, but lesson learned. My grandpa grew up as the sheriff's son in Harlan County, Kentucky in the 50s. It's a pretty remote coal mining town in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. Even more remote back then. To criminals posted bail after the sheriff, my great-granddad, had put them away and came to find and kill him. My grandpa, 17 at the time, says he got home. His mother told him there were 2 men on the roof and that his dad was out back trying to get them away with a shotgun. Who do you call for help when you're literally the sheriff of a remote backwoods town and your house is one held up? My grandpa went around back to see what he could do to assist. One of the guys gets down off the roof while the other one tries to stab my great-grandpa. My grandpa apparently picked up a rock and crushed one of the guy's skulls. My great-grandpa shot the other guy in the arm. My grandpa was delayed going to college a year because of the trial. Apparently they had to go to trial since he wasn't law enforcement, only my great-grandpa was. It was ruled self-defense. Later my grandpa was in another murder trial for drowning his coworker on a hunting trip. That one wasn't self-defense, but in the 60s they couldn't really prove shit, and he was found not guilty and the death was ruled an accident. My mom and I moved in with him for 3 months when I was a kid. All I remember is my mom leaving the house with a bloody nose with me in tow. I never spoke to or saw him again after that, but heard he died last year. Killing people does something to your brain, man. Also I got the fuck out of Kentucky as soon as I got the chance. Not me but my dad. I was next to him though. Happened in my first year of university when I lived with my parents. They live in an old complex with multiple stories and apartments. One night right at bedtime someone rang the bell. I picked up but no answer. That happened a few more times before I ignored it. Then silence. Few minutes later someone knocked at our apartment door. I looked through the spy hole and there was a bald, muscular tall guy. He kept knocking. I locked the door and told him to leave us alone. He didn't stop, so I called the police. We waited 20 minutes. Police still not here. Meanwhile the guy was banging at our door. I called the police again. The operator heard everything and told us to hide. My mom was looking out the window to see if a police car was in sight. My dad grabbed a knife and stood in front of the door telling the dude to fuck off. I was next to him with the operator on speakers and a knife in my other hand. I didn't really heard the operator. My heart was pumping like stupid. Then the bald dude really managed to knock down the door because the frame broke. My dad instantly attacked him with the knife and stabbed him down. He banged right on the floor and didn't move. I froze while it happened right next to me. There wasn't even a lot of blood. My dad pulled him out of the apartment and made sure my mom and I were fine. Just right after that the police came and called the ambulance. The neighbor stormed out of her apartment and said I saw everything. I was just like wow. We have waited like 50 minutes after the first police call. Dude survived and went to prison for assault and whatnot. It was a long list. Since then I had so much more respect for my dad. When I was 11 I was staying at my uncle's house with my mum. We were staying the night, not for any reason, just for the weekend. And in the evening we start watching a movie and I start tapping my foot for no reason. At this point my uncle must have had at least 3 beers and a few glasses of wine, so he was pretty intoxicated. He is a very lovely and kind man, but he was wasted, so he was acting differently. He then tells me not to tap my foot or we won't watch the movie. I thought it was a bit unusual of him, but didn't really bother me, so I said okay and stopped. A while later I started tapping my foot, not being disrespectful to him in any way. It's kind of an impulse that I have. He pauses the movie and is more annoyed this time. He tells me that he's turning it off. He is quite angry now, which is very unusual for him. My mum tells him to stop being so annoyed, and he starts banging on about how much of a piece of work I am. My mum tells him that we are going, but he stands up to block the doorway. The living room only has one entrance and some small windows. My mum is panicking now and tells him to move or she'll call the police. Her phone was in the other room though, but he tells her to sit down and talk about it. I tell my mum to sit down because I thought we could run for it if he was sitting, but my mum is panicking really badly, so she keeps trying push through, but he keeps pushing her back. I yell at him to move but he doesn't. Suddenly I just snap and have a sudden rush of adrenaline which causes me to pick up a glass cup and walk over to him and smash it over his head. He stumbles backwards with a shocked expression on his face, holding his hand on his head. I pick up a big shard of glass and point it towards him, yelling swear words and telling him to get the fuck away from us. We grab our stuff, my mum still shocked, and get out of there. We drive to an emergency room, as I have cut between my index finger and my thumb open on the glass. We had to wait a while before being treated, and my mum called my dad explaining the situation to him. After the emergency room, when we got home the first thing my dad said to me was, "How hard did you hit him?" Laugh out loud. I have a great relationship with my uncle now, as after that incident he hasn't drunk a single drop of alcohol. TLDR. 11-year-old me smashed a glass over my uncle's head after he wouldn't let my mum and I leave his house. Not me, brother-in-law. So my sister and her boyfriend had a bit of a sketchy neighbor. They lived in the countryside with a small forested area at the back of their house and made friends with him at first. Then he started getting kind of jealous if they invited other people over and all. He started making comments like, "Your kids in the wood. Traps, no more kids." Lovely. One night they woke up with a small fire blazing in their yard. It was a straight line of fire, so definitely been started on purpose. My sister complained with the cops, but no proof. Then one night, my sister is cleaning up the yard after a bonfire with friend. She is all alone. Her boyfriend is asleep upstairs. The neighbor show up with a frigging machete and a mask on his head. He starts yelling at her, and she is trying to calm him down. My brother-in-law wakes up from the screaming, looks down the window, and sees the crazy neighbor threatening my sister. So, he grabs a baseball bat and runs outside. The neighbor hit him first with his fist, not the machete, so my brother-in-law is convinced he's gonna die and has nothing to lose. He thinks he was hit with the machete and starts hitting the guy. The neighbor runs off and comes back outside all clean, no blood, as if nothing had happened. But he sees the cops that were called by other neighbors coming in the distance, goes back inside, mutilates himself and comes back covered in blood. His house was first on the road, so he throws himself at the car and files a complaint before my sister can do anything. My brother-in-law gets locked up for attempted murder. My dad paid the bail, and now restriction orders were set and all before the judgment 2 years later, and thousands of dollars in lawyers. While waiting for court appearance, the neighbor finally dropped the charges, but still gets to walk free. My sister and her family built a mini house and are traveling around for a while now, not trusting any neighbor. Future buried comment. But whatever, I was drunk in a club waiting in a very long line to use the toilet to piss. Had to go badly. Half hour later I'm next in line for the stalls. Dude tries to come in the side door and I put my hand up and say I'm next. Person in the stall leaves and he tries to step in. I spun him around by the shoulder and tries to step up and stare me down. Been fighting people my whole life. Shorty has nothing. Dude says, "Oh, you think you're hard?" And I shit you not, taps my crotch with the back of his hand. I see red, and I hit him harder than I have ever hit anyone in my life, which is saying a lot. I guess he thought I was doing the fake punch make you flinch stuff, because he didn't move. And all he had time to say was yeah, bam. Square in the jaw with full force and flawless form. I'm not sure what exactly knocked him out, hand, stall or floor, but he was like a puppet with his strings, cut while being thrown. His skull hit the stool side slap and smacked the pavement with that sick pop, like you are trying to pop open a coconut with a hammer. He was out. I stood over his body and pissed in the toilet because, damn, I had to pee. Angriest pee of my life. I was so mad. Stepped back and there was a puddle of blood all over the floor toward the drain from his skull. I didn't step in it. I turned to see everyone in the line white as a sheet and horrified. I looked at them and the door and I sheet. You not, they parted like Moses in the Red Sea. Slapped that side door open so hard I actually broke a bone in my left hand. The club was packed, and I took off my black leather jacket and turned it inside out, bright red shirt underneath, and messed up my hair, and went upstairs to hang with my friends on this balcony thing overlooking the outside stage. Watched bouncers and cops comb the place looking for me while I played it cool and tried to listen to the dumb stuff my friend was saying for more than an hour. They never found me. How do I feel? I'm not proud of it. I didn't mean to hurt him that bad. He touched my junk and I lost it. Years of training, even fought off armed opponents, and I have never lost it until that moment. I have no idea if he lived, but I bet he was never the same. His head smacked that solid pavement so hard I couldn't believe it. The broken bone in my hand from slapping the wooden door was the only real injury. Knuckles were bruised but healed quick. Legally, I defended myself against a sexual assault. Lots of witnesses could have verified. It does not feel like I won. I wish he wouldn't have messed with me. I don't look like much. Most guys think they can take me. That's the point. You don't start fights with strangers because you are putting your life in their hands for nothing. There is always someone better, and you don't want to meet them like that. I was working up in the Northwest Territories, had made a few new friends over the course of a couple weeks, and we finally got a chance to go to Yellowknife and enjoy some drinks and explore the town. I was dead dog tired, but grateful for the break. So anyway, there was a cute girl with us, a group of 5, and she got invited to visit a shop with one of our members' girlfriends who lived there. They took off, and the rest of the guys went to play pool and I decided to chill with my beer. Had a burger coming. Anyway, after about 15 minutes I got my burger and was stuffing my face when the girl came back in, scared as shit, and when she got to the table I asked what was wrong, and she burst into tears. On her way to the store she realized she'd forgotten her purse on the chair, so she ran back to get it, cutting through a green space where a man assaulted her. She was shaking and didn't give much details at the time, but she showed me where he had scratched her stomach grabbing at her pants. Then her eyes went wide, and I saw a guy walk into the lounge. He saw her, and wouldn't you believe it, he actually faking approached the table. She said he was a guy, and he was a huge native, like 250 plus lbs and at least 6 feet 3. Now I've seen my fair share of shit up there, white boy growing up with the natives, whole other story, and have had to defend myself plenty of times, but this was different point. So he approaches with this cocky smirk on, and I step up and tell him to leave before we call the cops. We were going to anyways, but this was before cell phones were everywhere. He tells me to fuck off and that he wants to talk to the girl. Tried to push past me, and I said, no way, you walk out the door right now or I'll have to put you on the floor. He gave me a look like, what the fuck are you gonna do? I was 6 feet 180 pounds. He grabbed me by the shirt and that was all I needed. I kicked him in the knee, elbowed him in the face, grabbed the hand on my shirt, and twisted his arm until I heard his shoulder pop. He collapsed to his knees and I Spartan kicked him in the chest and kept my promise of putting him on the floor. The place went crazy. Native guys saw it and were pissed at first. It actually got quite hairy and the rest of my group came to back me up, but it calmed down real quick after we explained. Buddy just laid there groaning in pain, blood pissing from his sknoz. Bartender saw it all and called the cops. After sending him to the hospital and speaking to us, they took our info for the investigation and said they would call. No charges were pressed against me and the guy went to jail for a couple weeks I believe, but I did find out later that I had broken his knee, nose and fractured his rotator cuff, and to top it off a serious concussion. Kinda earned a name for myself around work and the girl was enamored with me for a while until we had a good talk and I told her I didn't want a relationship just because I saved her. I was into a different girl at the time. She respected that and we became good friends and I never once felt bad for what I did. Way back in the mid-70s, my family of mom, dad, 2 older sisters, and 1 older brother and I were watching TV one night. The phone rang, and my dad answered it to be told by a neighbor they had heard someone on their roof. As he is talking to my father, we hear footsteps from the roof. Dad goes running outside as my brother, 16 or 17 at the time, grabs a bat. Mom is holding us inside, not physically, but you didn't argue with mom, at the open front door. The neighbor that had called us also called the neighbor to our other side, where we were at the end of a cul-de-sac. We called a court. All the neighbors were coming out of their houses now. We see a teenager come running out from behind the next house with the owner right behind him. Now the neighbor wasn't young or very big, I guess 5 feet 7 inches and lightweight. He tackled the kid, but ended up taking a very solid punch to the face that he was who's he from. My dad, who was not small nor lightweight and had been a Golden Gloves boxer growing up in Chicago, wasn't far away and was on the kid before he got back up. Well, my dad kneeled down over that kid's and one very solid jab knocked that kid out. Dad sent me to get a rope from the garage and I brought out our big hemp rope, at least 1/2 inch by 20 feet. The drugged out kid was wrapped up like mummy and securely tied off when the cops got there. I clearly remember the first cop looking at the kid on the ground, having a very hard time keeping a straight face. He lost it when another cop walked up and started laughing out loud. They looked up at my dad and asked him if he would mind untying the guy for them. The punch had broken the kid's nose and he had blood all over his face. My father did tell them he only hit him once. I don't remember the cops staying long at all, and the only thing we ended up hearing after the fact was there were 2 of them high on something that for some reason thought running over the tops of homes was a good idea. The other guy had gone over the back fence onto the road instead of the side fence into the neighbor's yard. First time answering a post here. Hi, anyways. I was 21 at the time, and a few friends and myself decided to go for a walk at this town over by us. They have a nice well-lit boardwalk with a beach on one side and restaurants in the area. Really nice place. But this night changed it for me a little bit. Some people there are still stuck in some sort of territorial guarding BS. Basically, if you're not from that town, you have to get out. Point, it's me, 3 friends that are girls and a guy friend. We are walking to leave the boardwalk at this time and head to my car, and these 3 guys come next to us and start walking our pace. They kept saying, "You better be leaving. Out of towners, hot, get out." I replied back saying we were walking to my car. They didn't care, so I waved my friends off and tell them to walk to my car. The guys stay behind and they surround me, which was the idea because I didn't want my friends to get hurt. We walk down the ramp and at the moment we are halfway down, a guy that looked like Curly from Three Stooges tells me to fight this walking tree of a guy next to me who was 6 foot plus. I'm 5 feet 9 inches. I replied back and said no and kept walking. Point at this moment we are side by side again and I get a semi-hard nudge by one of the guy's fist to my jaw, and right when that happened, I get hit in the back of the head and fall to the ground. I was on all fours and I got hit in my head by kicks and punches. I covered myself right when I knew shit was not going well. I got back up on my 2 feet. First person I saw, double of, was Curly. I grabbed him by his white shirt, pulled him into my fist, kneed him in the stomach, and then his head. The walking tree comes over, swings at me. I move out of the way, and he hits my shoulder. Pull his wrist over, kicked him in the stomach, right hooked his jaw, and he was out like a light. The third guy ran away. Seconds later I hear cop sirens everywhere, and this security guard comes running towards me from her apartment building. He reminded me of Anthony Anderson in his role of Malibu's Most Wanted. He came out yelling, "I called the cops, I called the cops." I saw the whole thing. Man, security stayed with me. Cops showed up. The guard told them what happened, and so did my friends. Cops noticed the guys right away and said they have been reported before for something similar in verbal and physical abuse to families and other people. The 2 guys I knocked out were still pretty messed up. They couldn't stand up and the tree's jaw was not looking well. The officers had to help them up briefly after they were cuffed. Cop comes over to me and says, "So that shirt you're wearing, I'm guessing it's not just for show." My reply back was, "No officer, I've been training in martial arts for 5 years." Not exactly sure if it was legal, but I was in grade 4, so who cares. There were these 2 girls in my elementary school. Their first names were Paige and Avery. They were best friends and were also in the same grade as me and my best friend, who we will call C. I liked Paige as a friend. She was nice to me. On the other hand, I didn't like Avery. She was rude and selfish and even told my crush I liked him, even though I clearly told her not to. No, he didn't share the feeling. C was and still is the most innocent, smart, and kind person you would ever meet, and I'm super protective over her. One day, we are playing in a blocked off sandbox where teachers can't really see you. Nobody else was around. We weren't supposed to be there, but we didn't care. Anyway, we built a sandcastle and I go to collect some pine cones and twigs to decorate it. In that time Paige and Avery see me walk out of there and realize C is in there. Apparently they had some beef with C because she roasted them in front of the entire class, which made their crushes laugh at them. They walk into there without me noticing them and walk up to C. They call C a fat ugly faking loser and push her into the sand. Which makes no sense because she is really skinny and beautiful, unlike me. It just so happens that I walk into the area and see all this happen. Being the overprotective friend I am, I run over to Avery and give her my strongest grade 4 punch to the face, causing her to fall to the ground and cry. Next I tackle Paige and, not hating her as much, simply slap her. Turns out that Avery, the one who was rude to me, had acted super kind to C, and Paige, the one was super nice to me, had been a beach to her. Don't know why they did this, because apparently they both secretly hated both of us. Me and C are fine now and are still friends, and the beaches got in a lot of trouble in the future and ended up moving schools. Obviously they told on me and me and C told on them, but since nobody had seen it and there was no marks on any of us and me and C were perfect little angels that wouldn't do anything bad, we all just had to stay in from recess for a couple weeks. It was worth it. Sorry, English not my first language, so please bear with me. It happened about 2 years ago. It happen, and I can't do any shit but protect myself. Story began like this. I'm 21 years old that time and am work as foreman. I'm home alone and still live with my parent that time. I have a car, just a regular car I bought with my blood and sweat, and park in front my parent house. That night about 2 AM like that, I smoke inside in my alarm and I can hear some truck park behind my car and speak some Indian that I don't understand. Well, I keep my own business cause my neighborhood kinda dangerous. While I surfing Twitter, I realize they keep checking my car and their surrounding and start to low down their tools to tow my car. They have a towing truck and make a loud sound while they put it down. I got up and look, what are they doing? I confront them while inside my gate and my car about 3/4 feet from the gate. I ask, what are you doing? They shocked and stopped doing anything, and thief 1 said nothing, just doing my job cause this car didn't pay about 4 months and we have to tow this away. I ask them, do you have a document to prove you have right to tow this car? He said, yes, I have it in my truck, I'll go get it. While he go in the truck, I go get Machete and unlock my gate and walk behind him. And I know he not gonna take some document. My guts were right, he maybe grab some weapon to knock me out or something. And yes, I saw something shiny and it's really a real gun. So I put my machete to his throat and grabbed his gun. I told him to leave before I do something like your worst nightmare, and so thief 2 aware that he been busted. So he attacked me from behind and pushed me, and I slit thief 1 throat. I was able to dodge to blow and I saw he hit me with a crowbar, my machete in the truck, and what I have is his gun. I yell help loud as I could at that time and crawling for help. The one blow was almost fatal and can kill me and lose my balance to stand or guard myself. Thief 1 was gasping and a lot of blood spraying at front seat, and thief 2 was furious and really want to kill me and really want to finish me off. Turn around, point the gun at him and warning him he just edgy walk like some killer finishing move. I close my eyes and shoot 3 times, and the last thing heard a metal collapse and thud sound. All my neighbors come out helping me and yell for help that night. Cops coming and ambulance were check the thief and the only last one they help. The cop handcuffed me and dragged me inside the ambulance. Not me, but a friend who I've lost contact with. Shortly after I was hired, I heard my manager had killed someone in self-defense. I thought there was no way as he was so chill and nice. About a year later, we go to get lunch and asked him what happened. This guy does enjoy guns, but never talks about killing people. Just enjoys the hobby. My grandfather was a gunsmith, so I understood. To make a long story shorter, the actual story was much longer. He was in an apartment complex and was dating a girl a few doors down, who he is married to now. He knew she had a stalker, but he never really acted on it. One night while in his apartment, he hears a frantic knock at the door. It's his girlfriend screaming to let her in. He was a bit nervous, so he rushed to the door, let her in, and locked the door. She said she was chasing her. The stalker was outside the door a few seconds later and started pounding on the door. He was incredibly drunk. He looked the peephole out and noticed he had a knife. He went to go grab his handgun, and as he was doing that, the guy shouldered the door and he noticed the door wasn't holding. By the time he grabbed the gun, the guy broke in and was charging after his GF. He said he unloaded 11 rounds quicker than he ever had before. The guy finally fell to the ground after the last shot, and they called the cops. Police came in, arrested him and took all of the weapons and ammo he had. He was taken into custody for 24 hours and questioned. Once it was all taken care of, they gave him his guns and ammo back and told him to move. The guy he shot had a large record of being aggressive. His brother lived a floor above them and found out what happened. The next day, they left and moved states away to be safe with the GF's family. He said he doesn't regret it, but wishes it didn't have to happen. He still has trouble sleeping because of it. 2 big, brawly Polish guys were standing next to my buddy at a bar when he came up to order. The bartender went to my friend first and took his order for 2 beers. 2 things worth knowing. We live in Norway. There's plenty of Polish people here, and most of them are good, polite, and hard-working people. Some are drunken morons. Most pubs and bars, you pay for the drinks right away, usually while they're tapping the beers, etc. Alex ends up taking our beers right from under his nose and tells him this never came. The bartender confirms and apologizes as this seldom happens. My friend gets his and comes back. For some reason they keep mad-eyeing us the whole evening. Later, when we are standing outside smoking before we left, I walk back to tip the bartender and say bye to the doorman. Used to work the door around town myself, and also to trained Muay Thai with a few of those who work there. My friend goes to the bathroom, and I wait outside. My friend comes back and keeps looking over his shoulder. When I ask why, he tells me that one of the dudes bumped into him and he just wanted to leave at that point. Suddenly I hear someone rush up behind us, and when I turned around, my friend was being held in a rear naked choke, lifting him up from the ground. I grabbed an empty beer bottle from the sidewalk and run at them. The guy turns just enough for me to get in a perfect swing right above his ear, so my friend was let go. I tell him to run towards the bar and get help. Before he gets anywhere, the cops showed up. Having seen the whole thing, doorman from the pub came, told the cops what had happened earlier, and that this was completely unlike us, and if they'd been attacked by us, they were likely to have started it. Cops let us go home with one of my friends, took our information, and I ended up with 200 hours of community service, as I've been out pub boxing a few times before. Both of the men were deported back to Poland as this was not their first assault, one with 32 stitches on his head. Judge called me a good friend. Might got a slight problem with impulse control, but a good friend nonetheless. I need to get this off my chest. 3 friends and I were allowed to camp alone on the beach. So we were 4 proud 13-year-olds who would be alone the whole night. This was great. We had much fun, but we were going to sleep at 1 AM or something cause we got tired. When everyone was sleeping at 2 AM or something like that, I woke up because I heard noises. Footsteps in the sand. I didn't move, and I was hiding under my blanket. When I was 100% sure that the thing outside was a human, I realized that this person was looking for something. I wanted to get up and open the tent a little bit, but it didn't come to that point because the person asked, "Is it you?" At this moment I wasn't sure if I'm really safe. I thought he would leave soon, but he asked that. I was hiding under my blanket again. I never heard this deep voice before, so this person could not know me at all, right? After trying to be as quiet as possible under my blanket for good 20 seconds, the man started opening our tent. One of my friends woke up next to me, and I heard him whispering, "Jerry, is that you? Please stop that." I only could see a little bit under my blanket, and when the stranger was in next to me, I faking jumped up, and in the same moment I saw how he tried to faking stab my friend with a knife. He was like aiming for his chest, and before he could hit him with the knife I tried to do something with my hand so he would not stab my friend. This knife went through my hand, and we were holding eye contact, and I was pretty sure I was gonna die. I didn't even scream or something. I didn't know what the fuck just happened. The man pulled the knife out of my hand and I never saw so much blood before. He tried to hit me with the knife and somehow I grabbed the knife out of his hand, with my other hand of course, and rammed it into him. Between his shoulder and his throat. Of course everyone was awake, so we all ran away. The police came 20 minutes later. What happened to my hand? Well, the knife went through my hand, so it broke some bones inside of it. I had to stay in the hospital for 2 weeks cause I lost so much blood, and almost every bone in my hand was crushed into pieces. They had to get the little pieces out of me. EWW. Everything was faking destroyed, and not a single doctor thought they could fix that. I got a new hand now, and I learned to live with it. This dumb fuck of a creep lost so much blood that he died because I hit him between his shoulder and his throat, and I pulled the knife out. They found out this guy was a pedophile and was going to therapy because of it. Good. He rapped his niece the day before. I'm 14 now. We all are still friends. Everyone is good. I thought I would get bullied for my new hand, but everyone said it's cool. We 4 are gonna camp again this year. Same place, same date, same friends. New girlfriends, muahaha. I already see the comments. Yes. Yes, I can master bait with the robot hand. Creeps, and yes, I call it robot hand. I'm such a virgin. I was about 12 at the time. It was roughly 1 AM at the time this happened. I was woken up by a sudden smash. It clearly wasn't just my head because my brother, who was on the bottom bunk, also heard it. My parents were out for the night at a party or something for one of their friends' birthdays. I instantly got out of bed and went to comfort my little brother since he was really scared. And so was I, being so young. Anyway, we heard footsteps coming up the stairs and a light turning on. I decided to get my toy wooden dagger we had got from a family trip, which was rather blunt. With our room being so close to the stairs, they tried coming to our room. With the mess, it took him some time while I prepared to defend us. He kicked the door down and I instantly saw me. He had attempted to hit me with his gun, too close to shoot, and thanks to having multiple brawls with my brother in the previous years, I managed to dodge. Then, I summoned up all my strength and jabbed him in his stomach. It had surprisingly pierced his skin and now he was bleeding all over the floor. While he was weak, I took his gun from him and threw it to the other side of the room. Then I kicked him to get him on the ground so I could call 911. He tried hitting me again and again until suddenly, he just stopped moving. The police came and questioned me and my brother, and when my parents returned, I felt horrible for what I had done as we were informed he had died 2 weeks after the incident. I don't have a clue why they told us, but they did. Our repair bills were free, luckily enough. I became popular at school, but some people feared me for I had killed that man that night. I had struggled to tell you all this without becoming afraid it would happen again. Okay, so I'm a very paranoid person. I always have a way to be constantly recording audio when I leave the house, and I recently got a pair of glasses with a camera in them just in case. I also carry a balisong knife, butterfly, anywhere I go anyway. I was on my way home from school when this random guy in his 30s walks up to me and demands I give him my wallet. I could tell he was drunk as hell because all of his words were slurred and he was leaning against a telephone pole for support. He pulls a beer bottle from his jacket and smashes it against the pole, no doubt thinking it would be a good weapon. The entire bottle broke and he had bits of glasses stuck in his hand. He must have been really wasted because he didn't react to any of this. I by now had already taken out my phone, set it to record, and put it in my front pocket on my shirt, just enough where it could still record. I tell the dude I don't want any trouble and that I'm going to just walk away. Out of nowhere the dude lunges at me, but misses completely. He falls on the ground and just passes out. I think it's over at this point, but I was wrong. I begin to walk away when some random dude from across the street comes out of his house with a gun. It's legal to have a gun where I live, if you have a permit. And yells at me for attacking this dude and how he was gonna shoot me in my racist ass. Both him and the drunk dude were black, I'm white, and that people like me are the reason he needs a gun. I tell him that I don't want no trouble and that the dude had just failed to rob me. Then, guess what he did? He shot at me and started to run towards me and shooting. He missed most of his shots, but one of them hits me in the leg. I take out my balisong from my pocket, flip it open, and stab the guy right in his chest. At this point he was really close to me, but his gun got jammed. I just realized how r/thathapan that sounds, but damn it IDC, it probably saved my life. He starts to punch me, but as I pull away I take the knife out of his chest, angling it up. This is very important, because this knife had a curve to it, and the way I got it out made it so I had the curve upwards, so this guy had a huge gash in his chest, and was bleeding harder than my old crappy apartment's water pressure. At this point I knew I couldn't just leave him, so I get my phone, stop the recording and save it to Google Drive for safekeeping, and call an ambulance. Needless to say, once the dude had made a full recovery, which took about a month and a half, if my memory serves me right, he got charged with attempted murder and the drunk dude got sent to the prison of addiction recovery. I have since moved from that place, and from now on refer to it as the Cash or Glass neighborhood. Note, English is my first language. I just suck at grammar. Make fun of me if you wish. Obligatory, not mine but my friend's. This was a couple years ago, so we live down here in the south, where it's guaranteed that someone is strapped. My friend, who we'll call Chief, he calls everyone Chief, and he's not even 30 yet, so Chief and I were at the local mud hole on this fateful night, as one does. I had already petered off and went home, while Chief stayed and partied with the other good old boys. So Chief and the boys are packing up when they hear a scream of one of the girls. Apparently two dudes had gotten into a fight over one hitting on the other's girlfriend, and one, the aggressor, we'll call him Blade, produces a knife, not a pocket knife, but a hunting knife. So the boys are trying to de-escalate the situation, but Blade ain't having that shit. Blasted drunk and angry AF so he is swinging the blade wildly. One of the boys called the cops, while Chief took matters into his own hands, so one of the boys hits Blade with a can of Bud Light, RIP beer. To distract him, Chief dashes up behind him and puts him in a rear chokehold, but Blade still has the knife, so Chief has to do something, and he breaks Blade's wrist. Blade shrieks in pain and drops the knife, and slowly gets KO'd. 3 Sheriff's deputies arrive and start to lock down the scene. They call an ambulance for Blade and cart him off. Chief is taken in for questioning, but ultimately let off, since he was justified under FL Code 776.012. 2. A person is justified in using, or threatening the use of, deadly or non-lethal force against another, if he/she reasonably believes that such conduct is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself/herself or to another, or to prevent the imminent commission of a felony. Blade was arrested for disorderly intoxication, assault, and possession of drug paraphernalia, faking meth. The others were given simple citations for underage drinking and warned about the dangers of alcohol. Chief still chuckles about it, while Blade has been in and out of jail/prison since. I was about 11 or 12 at the time, and some guys in my middle school had some stupid bet about who could kiss the most girls. One of them approached me and asked to kiss me. I told him I was interested, and he pushed me against a wall and stuck his disgustingly slimy tongue down my throat. I immediately pushed him off of me, and before I knew what was happening I had sucker punched him in the face. I don't even remember clenching my fist. He was just suddenly on the ground, propped up by one arm, with his other hand covering his nose. Blood was trickling through his fingers, and he was just looking up at me in sheer horror. I was terrified he was going to tell on me, so, while looming over this poor bastard, I gritted my teeth and hissed, "You won't tell anyone about this, will you? Or I'll break something else." He shook his head in terror, and I ran off. I told a teacher that I'd seen him fall, and his nose was bleeding, and they had to get him taken to hospital. A few weeks later, I saw him again, and he had like a white material across his nose. We made eye contact, and that same terror came back into his eyes. I still feel awful. He never did tell anyone as far as I'm aware, or at least he didn't tell any teachers or his parents. I never heard anything about it. It was late and dark on campus, and very few people were still around. I had a late class and ended up talking with the professor after, and then had to walk across campus in the dark to the car. Then a guy I knew from student council, who unbeknownst to me had seen me leaving, and followed me into the student government office to grab my bag off my desk. I was a student senator. He shut the door behind us, turned the lock, grabbed me and pinned me against a wall, and told me he was going to rap me, and said there was nothing I could do about it, and that he'd done it before and gotten away with it, and I couldn't stop him because he was somebody important on campus. He said to scream all I wanted. Nobody would come. I knew I couldn't panic. I wanted to scream and cry and freak out, but I knew it would make things worse. I was scared as fuck, and also knew I couldn't physically overpower him. I'm all of 5 foot flat, but I had a craft knife from art class in my pocket. I got my hands on the knife and stabbed him, mostly in his leg. Lucky for me, he let go to cover the giant gaping wound in his leg. I ran for campus security, where I promptly had a meltdown and started crying. He got stitches. Turns out I did a really good job of cutting him open and expelled. Thanks to other students coming forward after that, he ended up going to jail. 2. At the time, I didn't think about the fact that I was hurting someone. I just thought I had to get away, had to get safe. I'd have killed him if that was what it took. I was absolutely ready to stab him until he stopped trying to hurt me. Fortunately, it didn't come to that. When I was younger, I accidentally killed someone in self-defense. Had a day off school and decided to visit a friend in the city. I knew where he lived, was known for creepy people who would ask for deals of some sort, however was never confronted by anyone due to my parents coming with me. However, this time I went alone. Bad choice on my part. I was walking quickly and quietly to my friend's location, and had to walk down an alleyway that was secluded and dark. Midway through this alleyway I heard the sound of scuffling feet against the concrete. I started walking faster. Unfortunately, I didn't know where the sound was coming from. I bumped straight into a tall person when I took a glance back to identify the noise source point. I couldn't see the person's features at all, yet I knew that the person was male due to his clothing, trousers and bottom of shirt. I said sorry for bumping into you and started to walk around him. He immediately grabbed my arm, in which I swiftly turned around and headbutted him in the chest as hard as I could. He grunted and let go of my arm. I tried to run off, but this guy recovered quickly and grabbed me around the waist. I ducked down through his arms and under his legs. I was quite agile at this time. When he went to turn around to grab me again, I stuck my leg out and successfully tripped him. I heard a gasp, but didn't wait around and got out of there as fast as I could. Iron all the way to my friend's location and told his parents what had happened. They immediately rang the police and reported what had happened. Police arrived within minutes and asked where it had happened, in which I told them the alleyway name, but refused to go back. When the police asked, it wasn't until the next day, when I was back at my parents' house, that I learned that I had actually killed him. 2 police officers came to my parents' house and asked to speak to my parents alone. Me, being curious and wanting to know if this guy was arrested, eavesdropped the conversation. The older looking police officer told my parents what happened. Your daughter was attacked last night by a 67-year-old man that has a criminal file for being a convicted pedophile. She was very lucky to escape. Unfortunately, when she tripped this man, he ended up hitting his head on the concrete and instantly died. This was all I heard or wanted to hear. After he said died, I freaked out and went to my room. I was too young to go to jail and didn't end up doing community service. I was told when I was much older that due to being self-defense and him being a pedophile, I was excused from any sentencing or community service. To this day, I've only ever used self-defense to teach younger people how to protect themselves. I was living in a boarding house after school. One of the people living there was a 40-year-old drunk and her 23-year-old boyfriend, who was arrested for stealing a car and required to stay at her address as he had nothing else to put down. So he's living there not paying rent and stealing food and alcohol. I got home from work one day and had to kick out a couple of drunk high school girls. They were upset with me over this and started cheat. I went and locked my bedroom door. He decided to go through it. At that point he was fair game. Took him out. Couldn't call the cops as the girlfriend was guarding the phone. This was before ubiquitous cell phones. He woke up and came at me with a chair. I put him out again. Repeat a few times and I broke my hand and started throwing elbows. This entire time the girlfriend would rather this guy get killed in self-defense than let me call him an ambulance. At that point I left the house to walk down to a local rowdy pizza shop where there were usually cops at night. On my way down the hill the cops came flying up the other way. I turned around and ran up the hill, knowing full well where they were going. She had finally called for help and claimed I attacked him unprovoked. As I'm walking up the front yard, the cop in the door yells, "You can't be here, this is a crime scene," to which I replied, "You're looking for me." Fast forward 30 minutes, I've explained what happened. They confirmed that the bedroom door was off the hinges and another housemate verified my story. They took the guy to the hospital in an ambulance and let me go. They did ask why I faked him up that bad. He came at me with a chair. "What would you have done?" "Taste him," the cop said. Because I clearly have that option. Spent the night in the hospital getting a half cast on my hand. Then went back and making the girlfriend mop the not insignificant amount of blood off the floor. They arraigned him in the morning, charging him with assault causing bodily harm because I broke my knuckle on his face. It never did heal right. He went to jail for 6 months in Canada. That takes effort. Then when he got out he moved to a tour in search of the now ex and became infamous as the tour pants puller. Working as a bouncer at a country western bar in my hometown. I was 24. High school hero slash douchebag state wrestling champion comes in about 930 and obviously gets sheet faced and start doing douchy things. I think he was 21 at the time. By the end of the night has scamming on girls and flexing on every dude that comes near him. Has extremely strong and still well built even a few years out of high school, but has wasted and doesn't know how to street fight apparently. He crosses the line when he grabs a woman, my cousin, by the crotch. She turned around and dumped her drink on him, and he slapped her to the floor. Fortunately for him, I didn't see who he grabbed. I just responded to the commotion and started ushering him out the door with the other bouncers. He started swinging on us and me in particular, since we never really liked each other. He manages to get us to the ground and takes top position in my closed guard. Again, he clearly doesn't know how to fight. He starts raining down weak as hammer fists, while the other bouncers prove how useless they are. Finally he drops his head close enough that I can pull him in close and sweep to mount position. What I failed to realize was that we were right next to one of those concrete parking things that go across the top of parking spots. So when I pulled him down, quite forcefully, he got an inadvertent California smile because he had his mouth hanging open. He was immediately knocked unconscious, lost 6 or 7 teeth, and from my understanding, had some sort of brain bleed. Spent 3 or 4 weeks in the hospital. Whole thing was recorded by security cameras. This was right at the beginning of CELPHOK Northeast cameras, so as far as I know no one has footage of it. He was charged with drunk and disorderly, aggravated and sexual assault. I got a split lip and free drinks. Few years ago I was coming home alone after a night out drinking with friends. I was a bit drunk, but not wasted. I lived on a hill in the city. When I got to the middle of a bigger stair, 2 guys tried to mug me. They were taller than me. I was still pretty young, 20. I was scared shitless, like really I was ready to give whatever they would ask from me. But I don't know why, when one guy tried to put his hand in my pocket to grab my wallet, I just pushed. I pushed him way too hard, and he tripped and fell down the stairs, and as I said, it was a big ass stair. He didn't move anymore and his friend just ran off with the cell phone he already stole from me. I went to see how the guy was doing. He was breathing, but not moving, and his eyes were almost completely turned back. I ran a few blocks and find someone to call an ambulance. Didn't even think to call the cops, but a cop patrol was around and arrived first. The guy had regained consciousness, but was still in a bad shape, unable to stand up, and hazy. I told the story to the cops, and they told me to stay still while they talked to the guy. At this point I need to say that I'm white and was pretty well dressed that night, and the guy's was Algerian. The cops went full on racist with him, told him to say that he tripped and fell on his own and to keep me out of this. I protested, but they told me I would be jailed for this if the guy didn't lie. The guy agreed. They left out the theft charge and me pushing him out of the report, and I just went home. I felt super guilty about this story for years, and recently a cop friend of mine said that this was common stuff in the police to leave out of the report injuries done in self-defense, either because the situation would have put the primary victim in danger, or because the cops just wanted to screw with the guy getting a taste of his own medicine. Either way, he told me that I wouldn't have risked anything in that situation, and that in the end, this deal helped the guy more than me. So, now I'm not sure how I feel about this. Just a shitty situation full of shitty people. This is my throwaway account, and this is my story. It's long. TLDR at bottom. Basically I'm in the British Army, and during my time in Afghanistan in 2010 I had to make a split-second decision that saved my life and my friend's life at the expense of a 15-year-old local boy. I was on stag sentry duty on the main gate of our patrol base. It's about 2000 local time, so the sun was setting and getting dark, and doing my standard dark checks and looking down my weapon sight, I see what looked like a teenager walking with his dad, wasn't his dad, towards a tree line 200 meters or so from my post, start scanning the next sector, and then bang around goes through the guard post and smashes into the post, holding the roof. My initial reaction is holy fuck. Then I radio the command center, contact wait out. This put the patrol base in alert. Then I start to scan my arcs again and see the man I saw earlier running away, but with no boy this time. I move my sight towards where I last saw them, and the boy's holding an AK-47 in his shoulder, in a fire position, looking right at me. Without even thinking I pull my trigger and fire 3 rounds. I radio the boss with updates on the situation and that I have fired in retaliation and engaged a target. About 20 minutes later I'm relieved of duty, placed in a room with no weapon and some senior rank chatting to me whilst the other troops do a patrol. to see what I engaged. It was indeed a local 15-year-old kid whose family had been held ransom by the Taliban, who made him shoot at us otherwise they would kill the family. I was interviewed by the military police and cleared of any crime as I engaged a target that was a live threat to life, and I later found out that he had a RPG next to him that he was going to fire given a chance. Point: this has greatly affected me, even more so that I have a son now, and think about it. Nearly every day. Point: I have mates who have also killed local teenagers who have picked up weapons thinking it's a game and pointing them at troops and vehicles and then been engaged by my mates. Not a pretty sight seeing a 13-year-old kid engaged with A50 mounted in a vehicle. Point: TLDR on guard in Afghan 2010. Come under contact. Engage the target. Turns out it's a kid who has been made to and was going to fire a grenade into my post. I was having a party at my apartment in Kansas City years ago. My neighbor across the hall, Dant, was a no bullshit thug from New York. He'd scrap with anyone, but we were cool. Point: anyway, two random dudes show up at the party and they were being rude as hell to everyone, but seemed like they knew one of my friends, so I told him to handle it. Point: they leave and go downstairs where my Nigerian friends were also having a party. Sheet goes down, and I think one of the guys said, "All I know is I wanna see that beach lick that beach's pussy." Turns out, the second beach was Dant's girl. So they get kicked out there, and Dan goes downstairs to confront them. By this time, I'm out front as well just in case. Dan tells the guys that if they apologize for being disrespectful, he's gonna beat both their ass. Dude #1 tells Dan that he doesn't know exactly who he was disrespectful to, so Dan says fine, then go up there and apologize to every woman at the party or else they're scrapping. Dude #1 tells him to fuck off. Dude #2 chimes in and says my money's on my dog right here. So me, being the sheet starter I am, pulls out $1, lays it on the ground, and said my money's on Dant. Dant squares up, asks them if they are ready, and 2 hits later they're both on the ground, one of them with his head resting on the edge of a concrete step, the other one running off like a beach. Dant stomps on the guy's head, so now he's bleeding everywhere and running off. Half an hour to an hour later, they show back up at my apartment demanding to see Dant. I tell them that Dant isn't there and I don't know where he is. They're starting to argue with me, but I close the door. My buddy Big Steve asks where some girlies, and apparently I didn't notice her slip past me in the discussion with Dude #1. I open the door back up to grab her and pull her back in the apartment in time to see 3 other guys running up the stairs. I get pulled out of the apartment and jumped by 5 guys. Big Steve rushes out to help, and it's a melee. Well, I had a 1-liter glass beer mug in my hand, so I swung it at some guy's head. I miss, hit the wall, it shatters, but I still have the handle in my hand. Mentally, I kinda shrugged and threw a punch at Dude #2. Then it was like they vanished. Like, I threw the punch, and 30 seconds later there's no sign of them, except the trail of blood. I go back inside and tell my girlfriend to call the cops and look down, and I'm bleeding from a few cuts. Cops show up, we give a statement, tell them everything I said here, and asked if I was in trouble. They just said sounds like self-defense to me, and left. 6 months later I found out that the guy I threw a punch at ended up in IQ or some shit. Apparently my punch connected and sliced all the way through his cheek. I was told it took 31 stitches to get it sewn up. All this because 2 assholes can't respect women. Not sure if it was self-defense. Was more eliminate the impending threat. Was 18 or 19. Spending all my weekends downtown with friends hopping around college parties. There was one in an apartment building where a friend lived. Buddy's apartment was right by the front door with a porch that was right there at front door. Guy on the other side of the front door, across the hall from Buddy's apartment, was out on his porch pissed drunk harassing people going in and out of the party. We were sitting on the porch area having our own fun, paying him no mind. When he went from annoying to dangerous, a group of girls walked by to go to the party and he grabbed a girl by the hair. We said something, and he got super pissed and showed us a knife in his pocket. The porches were gated, so there was 2 gates, and about 10 yards or so between us. He was so drunk I doubted he could get over the waist high gates to get to me, so I just kinda laughed it off like okay tough guy. He didn't let it go though, and kept getting more and more aggressive until eventually he came over one of the two gates and was just out of arm's length from us, though he still had his knife in his pocket. He's talking all tough while we ignore him, getting more and more aggressive. I decide I'm not going to wait until the knife is in play and just stood up, walked over, and landed a right hand that would make Tank Abbott jealous. Him being drunk, he had no reaction time and just took it clean on the jaw. He was out before he hit the ground and cracked the back of his head on the concrete. I'll never forget the sound it made. Then a pool of blood formed under his head. I panicked thinking he was dead and bolted. Found out a few weeks later from the buddy whose apartment I was at that he was in the ICU for a few days, had to have a hole drilled in his head, broken jaw, and had to drop out of college to move home with his parents as he couldn't care for himself. It really faked me up knowing I ruined that guy's life. It's been over 15 years and I still wonder how much his life changed that night. I cold just walked away, but thought I was a tough guy and wanted to teach him a lesson. Almost ruined both his life and mine over nothing when I cold easily just walked away. I have avoided physical conflicts at all costs ever since, even when it makes my blood boil to do so, and I feel like a giant pussy for letting someone disrespect me or a loved one. TLDR, don't punch drunk people. I'm not sure how valid this is, since I never found out what happened to the guy or how injured he was, but I was working night shift at a hotel and I got a call of screaming coming from a room. When I got there, a female guest was shouting for help, so I opened the door to find her on the bed with a man on top of her. She looked at me and said he was trying to rape her, so I grabbed him by the neck and tossed him out of the room and locked the door behind me. I called the cops on my phone and was trying to keep him away from the door because he was trying to get back in. He was super drunk and eventually took a swing at me. Because of how drunk he was, it was a slow, very telegraphed punch that I was able to dodge pretty easily, so I pushed him to the ground and told him to stay down. He was way bigger than me, so I didn't really want to wrestle him. Besides, I had zero experience in ground fighting at the time. I also didn't know how to keep him down without use of excessive force like kicking him or putting my foot on his throat. So he just got back up and started swinging at me again. I dodged and front kicked him back to the floor. He got back up, and when I threw him down again he managed to grab my tie and punch me in the face. So I had to drop my phone to be able to use both hands, and he now had me grabbed by the waist, and it kind of flipped a switch in me that was more like now my integrity is in trouble and I need to defend myself, because I was scared he was going to bite me in the junk. I started elbowing the living shit out of his head. I have no idea what amount of damage it did, but my elbow was entirely purple the next day. He kind of dropped down but still had a hold of my legs. I started punching the back of his neck, but then got scared I could cause damage, so hit him on the head instead. I managed to get free and the cops showed up right then and took him down. I ended up having to go to the hospital in the morning because my hand was broken. But other than the cops asking me if I was okay, taking a statement, and then afterwards asking me if I wanted to press any charges, nothing else happened. Not my story, but a dude in my small German town punched two guys into oblivion. There's a small city center with bars, shish lounges, restaurants, etc. There's a big open space in the middle and the bars etc. around this place, so the middle is always packed with people coming, leaving or just hanging around. So this guy, a trained kickboxer and Wing Chun fighter, happened to be there one night as he saw two guys assaulting one girl. As he learned later, one of them was her boyfriend, the other BF's best friend, and there were 4 to 5 people just watching the scene. Dude was choking and hitting his girlfriend and berating her about something. The kickboxer saw the opportunity, came flying in and knocked the first dude out hard. Half his face was broken from that punch and doctors put him in an induced coma for some days because of brain swelling. The boyfriend didn't even have the time to realize what happened as the kickboxer proceeded to work on him. When he was finished, dude had nearly half of his body broken because the kickboxer was in a rage. He knocked him down with 2 punches to the face and then proceeded to beat him MMA style, then got him up and slammed him into a wall etc. The bystanders ran away. I think they thought they would be the next, and the kickboxer finished the boyfriend with one more hard punch to the face. As far as I know, the boyfriend was already unconscious. Mr. Kickboxer then snapped out of his rage, checked the girlfriend, called that police point. Later he went to jail because of excessive force and using his fighting skills as a weapon. The girlfriend testified against him as a witness for her boyfriend, and all of them told the judge he started the fight and there never was a beating of the girlfriend. Very sad story, especially that she is being abused and still on his side and even defending him while turning her back on her real defender. The dude who got punched once was okay later. The other one who took the major beating has permanent damages for the rest of his life. He lost sight in one eye, will maybe live with pain in his face for the rest of his life and suffers from some sort of brain damage. Has not a vegetable, but will never be the same. The kickboxer is now out of jail, but the story scarred him for life. Has still that funny cool dude, but a lot of his views on police, helping people in need, laws etc. changed, and he got a bit reckless. Not like Has now running around and punching people for fun, but he doesn't give a shit about the police and law anymore, and has a hard time trusting or even talking to other people. He told me right now he just hates people and don't want to see them. I think he just feels deeply betrayed because he tried to do the right thing and then got faked by the woman he tried to defend, not in a sexual way. Sad thing is, when I asked him how he feels about it and if he would defend someone again in this situation, he just said no. I will just walk by and mind my own business. It's not worth it. To be honest, it's bullshit because it can make all the difference for the victim. But on another hand, I can understand he doesn't want to go to jail again for helping someone else. I think the over-the-top beating is what really got him in. Had he just knocked out both of them instead of beating the boyfriend like a maniac, he maybe wouldn't have been in jail. Forgive me for formatting on mobile at work. I'll try to keep it short. Freshman year of uni. I had a real late 3-hour lecture on Thursday nights and got out shortly after 10 p.m. The campus is nice and there are plenty of police presence on campus. 2 depths, but anywhere a block outside of campus is very much lower class / borderline poverty area, and I was renting a cheap place 2-mile walk from campus in the thick of it to save a bit extra cash a month. 2 weeks into the semester, the second class, that night about halfway back I noticed a pair of larger men tailing me. I'm a larger guy, 5 feet 10 inches, and they both dwarfed me. I picked up the pace and they both took off after me. They were much faster and closing quick, so I tried to duck into a side driveway / alleyway kind of thing to get away, but it didn't connect to the next street over and dead-ended to a high fence. The first guy, heavy Eastern Euro accent, rounded the corner and said wallet, phone, now, pulling a knife, about 15 feet away at the entrance. The other guy behind him was panting a bit and shadowing him. I wasn't rational, I just panicked and tried jumping the high fence. When he tried to close in, the fence however couldn't support me and I tumbled over, taking a large section down, breaking with a loud crash against the building. You know those fences with the spear top decorations made of steel or whatever, the gothic style ones? Yeah, the whole section came down with a loud crash and one of the poles went clean through his leg, pinning him between the broken section of fence and the building. I don't remember much after that, except the howls of pain and metal clanging as I ran away. I just ran until I was at my apt. I was heavily out of breath and hysteric and tried to explain the stuff to my roommate Steven, who got the gist of it, and he drove us to his parents' house a few towns over to spend the night. I reported the whole event the next morning to campus police, and that was it. For months I took a different way home, never going the same way twice. 4 years later, and I still avoid downtown after dark, especially by myself. I got a wild story, and it wasn't really legal or defense of self, but it's Ask Reddit. So when do the comments ever fully match the question? But because of corruption no one was ever charged or even brought in to jail. So my family was and still is established in a rural, kinda impoverished town in upstate New York. For those of you who have never been to upstate New York, you might be surprised at the Wild West vibe some of these little villages may have, and yes, it is technically a village. To this day, people walk around in cowboy hats with cigars. Picture the town from Brockback Mountain, shrink the mountains, and add more water. You got this place. Anyway, point back in the day, my family was involved in illicit groups. I hesitate to say it was any sort of mafia, because there really wasn't a whole lot of money involved. I mean, there was money, but not Godfather levels. It was all very quiet, and I'm a woman and my father wasn't involved personally, so I don't know the specifics of what they dealt with. Drugs, weapons, there was definitely something. My uncle was literally the sheriff in town, and he also was the bouncer for this bar, where all the activity happened, and I assume the money was laundered. One day, my grandfather is sitting there having a beer, and these kids come in and fuck him up with a lock and a chain. His face still doesn't look right, 20 years later. Obviously, my cousins all catch wind of it, so they need to send a message back. Point they find the kid that did it, take him to the bar, bring him out back, and the way the situation ends is one of my cousins breaks a beer bottle and scoops this guy's eye out with the neck. Because my uncle was the sheriff, nothing happened, and even if this kid had the balls to try and report it, no one would have done anything. Point turns out that the kid who lost his eye wasn't even involved in the whole thing, and I never heard what happened to the guys who actually did it. Don't think I wanna know. Things changed and no one to my knowledge is involved anymore, since all the old folks are either passed on or content to sit with their whiskey and watch the grandkids play. Back in 2013, my affluent neighborhood, an upscale gated community, large houses, large yards, and the adjacent affluent neighborhood situated on a golf course were experiencing a rash of vehicle break-ins and stolen vehicles, vandalism, thefts from garages, etc. This kind of thing hardly ever happened around here. Usually it was just kids setting off firecrackers in the middle of the night and other silliness, never any kind of burglary or property damage. I was sitting in my office one night, playing World of Warcraft with only my desk lamp on, when my alarm system dinged to indicate an outside door had been opened. This was odd, because it was around midnight. I knew my daughter was asleep. And every night I double check that all the doors are locked and secure. Thanks mom, for instilling this value. I have a few close friends / family who have a key and are welcome to come over anytime, so long as they notify me first, and they are very good about notifying me. This sudden triggering of the door ding wasn't sitting quite right with me, so I grabbed the pistol I keep in my office safe. I have a gun safely stored, but accessible in many areas of the house. Loaded a magazine, and chambered around as quietly as I could, then slipped off my shoes, shut off the office lamp, and went to go check everything out. I snuck out of my office, into the adjoining library / book room, and neared the corner at the bottom of the second flight of stairs. This is when I heard two people whispering, neither of whom I was familiar with. Seconds later, I heard the distinct sound of the stairs leading to the upper level creaking. So I chanced to glance around the corner too. 20-something guys were on their way up the stairs, and this is where my daughter was sleeping. In the moonlight streaming through the glass front door, I could see one of them appeared to be holding a rifle or shotgun. I wasn't about to let them get a shot off, so I sprung around the corner, screamed at the top of my lungs to catch them off guard, and fired multiple shots at the man holding the weapon from below him on the downstairs flight of stairs. Then the other man who had jumped toward me, turns out he was fleeing, but in the moment I couldn't tell the difference. The man with the gun dropped right there on the stairs. The other man ran out the front door, across my front lawn, across the street, and into my neighbor's yard. I kicked the man's gun as far away as I could, called my neighbor to let them know there was someone heading toward his house, then quickly dialed the police. When they arrived, I notified them that the man on the stairs was unresponsive, but that a second man had run into my neighbor's yard. They found the second man in my neighbor's kid's treehouse, barely breathing. He died in the hospital. The first man was killed right on the spot. After taking my statement and a follow-up meeting with a sergeant, that was the end of it. The two men, one Latino, one black, each had multiple drug-related and B&D offenses, but lived nowhere close to our secluded area. It is suspected they were casing the nicer neighborhoods for a while. They had gotten in by jimmying a window open with a pry bar and the latch had just given away. The smaller of the two then entered, unlocked the front door, and let the other in, hence the mysterious holding. If they'd simply both come in the window, I may never have known they were in the house. Oh, and the gun. Turns out it was one of those realistic looking R-style BB guns. Neither of them had a real weapon. The police asked if they could take my pistol into their custody as evidence, which I was fine with. I got it back a week or so later TLDR, to intruders versus one armed and pissed off single dad. Single dad will do whatever it takes to make sure his baby girl is safe. Edit. Paragraph spacing. Not me but my dad. My dad used to go out hunting to find dinner. Most of times we didn't have enough gas to go down to the grocery store to buy food. 20 minutes in, my dad sees a deer eating some grass, so he fired street it and hit it in the chest. It dropped and bled out. Dad walked over to wrap the corpse up, but was immediately yelled at by two voices. I later found out it were two hillbillies who lived in the forest area. The first one had a revolver aimed at my dad's face, and the other simply stayed behind the first one with a hunting knife. The first one cocks the gun back and then hits my dad in the chin with the gun. Dad stumbled back, then ran back a few distance. He sees the two running at him, so he aimed his Remington at the first one and fired, hitting the guy in the head and literally blowing his brains out. Other guy ran at my dad while he was reloading, so my dad and the second guy get into a fist fight, which ends with the second one on the ground, bleeding. Dad walked back to the house and called the cops, and they found the unconscious and dead hillbilly brothers. Turns out they were wanted kidnappers and such offenders, known for robbing and shooting people multiple times in the forest. Dad was initially charged with murder and assault, but the charges were dropped seeing as the hillbillies hid my dad and then charged at him. The second hillbilly died in prison during a riot, was accidentally stabbed by a toothbrush shank. They picked the wrong guy to rob. I was on a date with my boyfriend, now husband. It was around 5 p.m. We went out for dinner. We decided to go home after dinner and watch movies in my house instead. As we were walking home we came across a teenage girl, maybe 13 or 14 Y.0. She was being harassed by a group of men, 18 to 30 Y.0. I was about to jump in, but my boyfriend stopped me and told me not to interfere and to just call the police. I slapped the shit out of my boyfriend, and he was stunned and couldn't speak for a secretary. Then I yelled at the group of men, told them to let the girl go. I vividly remember them laughing and mocking me, and one of them said, "What are you gonna do? Call your daddy?" Then they laughed and told me to just mind my own business. My boyfriend kept on holding me back and told me to just go and call the police. I didn't mind him. I told him to shut the F up and let me handle this. One thing you might not know is that my grandfather and my father are part of the army, and they taught me self-defense, and I always carry a gun, pepper spray and mini knife. I threatened them with my gun. One man came near me and spat on my face. I brought my knife out and stabbed him in the belly. His blood sprayed all over my dress. I initiated a gunshot causing them to run for their lives. The teen was crying, and I checked her body for cuts or wounds. She had a cut on her neck, bruise on both eyes and her lips was bleeding, and her shirt stained with blood. She had a cut on her belly. My boyfriend was stunned and asked me where I got the gun. I pointed the gun at him, and he raised his hands, and I told him that he was a faking coward. The teenage girl turned out to be 13 years old, and her stepbrother is a member of that group of men who harassed her. Her stepbrother was put to jail, and her parents were shocked about what happened. Her mother is a lawyer and her stepdad is a police officer. My boyfriend, now husband, is a faking coward. Ladies, always take care and carry a self-defense equipment like a knife or pepper spray. Also, don't listen to your boyfriends. Do what you gotta do. My mom's a lawyer. My dad is now retired from the army. He's now a house husband and takes care of our 3 dogs. My grandpa passed away. Rip Pops. Always in my heart. The guy I stabbed is alive and in prison already. My husband called the police only after the incident because he was so shocked of what's happening at that time. This happened just 4 months ago. My husband is being a little beach at that time, but he's actually 6'5" in height and has a great build. A group of men are found and put to prison. The stepbro was mad at his stepsis because she was the favorite one. The girl is still in contact with us. She sometimes visits and gives us home-baked cookies. My FOVE. Edit. Now that I've read this, it sounds like I just wrote a fake script for a dramatic horror movie. Trust me, this was real. This is Reddit, and I want to share my real life experiences with you guys, not a fake made up story that never really happened. I was 15, just starting high school. I lived in a very average neighborhood, where everything was just normal. Nothing was special or bad about this neighborhood. Behind my house was this dirt trail that led into what seemed like a forest, but was not actually a forest. This area was pretty massive, and was also where me and my friends would just explore and hang out almost every day after school. This will be important information for later. So, everything was going great as my first week of school was slowly progressing. I made a couple of new friends, and there were 4 of us, became close really fast. So, when they would invite me to hang out, more than often we would go beyond the dirt trail behind my house and just explore the never-ending expansions of this so-called forest. Well, here's where she took a real big turn for all of us. One day on a weekend, we all decided that it would be one of the greatest ideas to spend the night out in the forest. So we all packed typical things you would usually take with you whenever you go camping: a flashlight, a tent, blankets, clothes, a few snacks, etc. I ended up taking one of my dad's handguns, just in case it was needed, and trust me, it was probably the best decision I've ever made, and was the one thing that would soon save all of our lives. While we all headed out, one of my friends spotted this rusty old broken down trailer, just out in the middle of this forest, abandoned. Another friend suggested we should spend the night in there, so we did. When we stepped in the trailer, it didn't smell too bad, but would often make loud eerie noises, and I mean really loud noises. But you would probably expect that from an old rusty trailer that looked like it was around 100 years old. Inside was a broken wall-mounted TV, as well as broken pieces of wood scattered everywhere on the floor. The walls and ceilings didn't look too nice either, they were very worn down. But it was in fact a large enough space to occupy all of us, and so we settled. We had gotten pretty tired by the amount of time that it had taken us all day to get situated and walk the distance that we did, plus it was already getting late, so we just went straight to bed. Keep in mind that across from where we slept there was a big window. Really late in the middle of the night, I was awoken by this very odd, disturbing sound coming from around our area. It sounded like a person softly speaking in a really high-pitched voice. I could hear them saying things like, "I get so tired of watching. I want to start doing. And also, I'm sorry for what's about to happen." Then it got closer. Now, I'm not the type of person that believes in demonic shit, but when I experience any sort of similar occurrence close to paranormal activity or any horror movie related things, I literally get all stiff and stop breathing. That's how scared I get. The voice was terrifying. Already scared enough, I looked over, and one of my friends was no joke wide awake and stiffly positioned upward. The expression on his face was what can only be described as pure terror and fear. His eyes were adjusted on the window. I looked over to where he was looking and saw a man that had legit carved a smile into his face. It was too real to be a mask or makeup. Blood literally dripped down from the sides of his mouth, which I could assume he cut his face no longer than an hour ago. I tried to move, but couldn't as we made eye contact for what felt like forever. He then moved away from the window and we could hear him walking around the trailer to the door side. I quickly scrambled in my backpack for the gun that I had brought while my friend was trying to wake up the others. Then we didn't hear anything. At this point my other friends were just as wide awake as I was, and they hadn't even seen and heard what I'd just seen and heard. I had the gun pointed directly in front of me towards the front of the trailer, where the door was. Then out of nowhere, this dude literally knocks down the trailer door, like he's faking superhuman or some shit. The door had really loose hinges, any one of us could have broken it down. I assume he was standing out there examining the door hinges and knew it would break easily, but just wanted to make a dramatic entrance. It had scared us way too much for our ages. All of us were 15. I shot at him, but missed and the bullet went through the top of the trailer. This was because my arm was shaking like a vibrator set to ultra turbo speed. The man didn't have any weapon or anything in his hands, and full on jumped at us with aggressiveness. It was too late for him to do anything though, before I had already got the second shot ready and fired. This time it hit, and I think the bullet went straight through his forehead and into his skull. Of course we immediately packed up and left. My friends shining flashlights in every direction, guarding me as I stood in the middle with the gun, ready to shoot anyone and anything that I'd see. Luckily we made it home safely, and when we did, my friend who had woken up right after I had was like, "Holy shit, what the actual fact did I just witness?" The other two were too scared to say anything. We decided we'd stay at my house with my bedroom windows and door shut and locked to the core. The next morning, we all talked about it, but didn't tell anyone else. We're all still good friends to this day, and once in a while we'll bring it up to freak each other out. Point: we never went into the forest ever again. Story, as if there was one. Grew up poor and angry. I've been in a few easily avoidable situations in 2011. Used to have this stupid rule that went around: if you could take the guy, the girl was free game. I was flirting with this chick at a party. She seemed to be into it. Her boyfriend sees and hits me over the head with a beer bottle. That ended with his knee shattering. Cops put me in the bullpen for the night. My lawyer, who's a cousin of mine, pulls me out. Have a long chat with some cops who by that time have everyone's story from the party, and I'm ultimately let off with a formal caution. The guy's family comes after us for medical because their son was some budding kickboxer, and I've ruined his future. And my lawyer really exaggerated the damage I took and leaned on the cops letting me walk out. His family for whatever reason dropped it, and I never heard from them again. There were some rumors that his fam always wanted him to go to business school, and having a limp made him change his ways, but they were rumors. In 2013, another time I knew some neo-Nazi guys. I was never one of them. I'm a Turk after all, but I drank with them, and they thought I was cool enough. I was walking back from a bar with one of them past some train tracks, and these two Lebanese guys mouthed off. Just young, dumb and Friday night. Nazi guys mouths off back at them, because you don't become a Nazi through good decisions. One of the Libo guys pulls a knife and lunges for me. That ends with me bleeding from the face, right arm and lower back, but the Libo guy gets dragged out from under me. Cops pick all four of us up. Nazi is charged with instigating and possession of meth, was unaware, and Libo guys for assault with a deadly weapon and possession of coke. I was getting phone calls for the next 3 to 4 months by various police personnel, but ultimately I just got another formal caution and told to hang with a better crowd. Have no idea what happened with any of them. After that, heard that eventually all those guys ended up in jail for one stupid thing or another. That incident also ruined my first application to the army, which is understandable. Not upset about it, because the second time I applied 4 years later they asked who I'd protect first, Turks or Aussies, and I got indignant and said Turks. My fam are still active military in Turkey. No money in the world to make you shoot your family.